Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still can't believe it's been 23 years since that night at Blade Lake, but the memory hasn't faded at all. I've never told anyone about this. Not my parents, not my wife, nobody. Who would believe me anyway? But I need to get this off my chest. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. I was 10 years old when my parents decided we should spend a week at Blade Lake with my grandparents in the summer of 1999. We weren't exactly the camping type, but my grandpa had this small pop-up camper he was proud of, and he'd been bugging my dad about using it for a proper family vacation for months. Blade Lake isn't one of those tourist spots with fancy cabins and boat rentals. It's pretty remote, tucked away in the foothills, about 3 hours from where we lived. The campground was basically a clearing with maybe a dozen spots for campers, surrounded by dense forest that climbed up steep slopes all around the lake. Our spot was at the edge of the clearing, with nothing but trees behind us going up a pretty steep hill. The first couple days were fine, swimming, fishing with Grandpa, my mom constantly applying sunscreen, even though I kept telling her I wasn't a baby anymore. My grandma made these amazing s'mores with peanut butter cups instead of plain chocolate. I remember thinking, maybe camping wasn't so bad after all. It was day 3 when everything changed. We'd spent the whole day hiking and I was exhausted. After dinner, everyone was sitting around the fire pit while I hung out inside the camper, reading some X-Men comics my dad had bought me for the trip. The sun was setting, and that weird in-between light was making everything look kind of hazy and blue. I was sitting on the little fold-out bench by the screen door because it had the best light. And honestly, I was kind of enjoying the quiet away from my family for a bit. I remember looking up from my comic and glancing out through the screen door, not really looking for anything, just giving my eyes a break. That's when I noticed something on the wooded slope behind our camper. At first, I thought it was just a weird-shaped tree, or maybe a bear, which would have been scary enough. But as my eyes focused, I realized it was something else. About halfway up the slope, partially hidden behind a thick pine tree, was this. I don't even know how to describe it. It was big, taller than my dad, who's 6 feet tall, and built thick like a football player wearing winter clothes. But it wasn't a person. The color was all wrong. A grayish brown that somehow blended with the trees but also stood out if you were looking right at it. The thing that really got me, though, was its head. It was blocky and square, and it seemed to sit directly on these massive, wide shoulders with barely any neck in between. I couldn't make out facial features from that distance in the dim light, but I could tell it was watching our campsite, watching me. I froze completely. I couldn't even blink. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing, but my body knew to be absolutely still. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds or so. Then my mom called from outside. "Joey, did you want any more hot chocolate before I put everything away?" I turned my head just for a second to answer her, and when I looked back it was gone, just gone. No movement, no sound, nothing. Just empty forest where this massive thing had been standing. "Joey?" my mom called again. "No thanks," I managed to croak out, my voice suddenly dry. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. What was I supposed to say? That I saw a monster in the woods? My dad already thought I watched too many scary movies. He'd just tell me it was a bear or my imagination. For the rest of the evening, I pretended to read my comics, but really, I was scanning the woods through the screen door, looking for any sign of that thing. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it, but they all just went about their normal camping routine, cleaning up dinner, talking about tomorrow's plans, complaining about mosquitoes. When it got dark, we all went to bed. The camper was tiny, with a bedroom area for my grandparents at one end, a converted dining table bed in the middle where my parents slept, and a small pull-out sofa where I slept near the door. The walls were basically just thin fabric and plastic windows. I remember thinking how exposed we all were, how this flimsy camper wouldn't protect us from anything. I pretended to fall asleep, but there was no way I was closing my eyes. I lay there in the dark, listening to my family's breathing turn steady and deep. The only other sounds were the usual night noises, crickets, an occasional owl, the soft lapping of the lake water in the distance. It must have been around 1 in the morning when I heard it, a light tapping sound on the side of the camper. At first, I thought it was just a branch moved by the wind, but there wasn't any wind. The tapping came again, more deliberate this time. Tap, tap, tap. Then it moved, working its way around the camper, getting closer to my window. My window was right above my bed, and I had left the shade partially open because it was a warm night. The tapping stopped right outside my window, and I felt a presence there. I was terrified, but couldn't stop myself from slowly turning my head to look, and there it was, its face pressed close to the glass, looking in at me. I'll never forget those eyes, dark and deep-set under a thick, heavy brow. They weren't animal eyes, but they weren't human either. They had awareness in them, intelligence. The face was wide with patches of shorter hair around the cheeks and jaw, almost like a man with a patchy beard, but not quite. Its nose was broad and flat, and its skin was a grayish-brown color that made it look ancient somehow. We stared at each other, and I couldn't even breathe. I was paralyzed with fear, but also fascination. There was something almost sad in those eyes, something lonely. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what I felt in that moment. Then it did something I still can't explain. It raised its hand, a massive hand with long fingers, and tapped twice on the glass, deliberately, like it was trying to communicate. Then it backed away from the window and disappeared into the darkness without making a sound. Something that big should have made noise moving through the underbrush, but there was nothing, just silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. I stayed completely still, watching that window until the first light of dawn broke through the trees. My body was so stiff from not moving that it hurt to get up when my mom finally woke everyone for breakfast. "Did you sleep okay, honey? You look tired," she said, ruffling my hair. "Yeah, just excited about fishing today," I lied, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. The weird thing is, nothing else happened for the rest of the trip, 4 more days, and not a single sign of whatever I'd seen. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. I kept looking, believe me. I barely went in the lake or paid attention to anything else. My parents thought I was coming down with something because I was so quiet and jumpy. I didn't want to go back in the camper at night, but I couldn't explain why without sounding crazy. So I just lay there each night, staring at that window, terrified it would come back, but also waiting for it. I don't know how to explain it. On our last day, while everyone was packing up, I worked up the courage to climb partway up that wooded slope, looking for any evidence. I found nothing except a weird bare patch where moss had been stripped off a fallen log, but that could have been anything. I've spent years trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was a bear standing oddly. Maybe it was a person playing a sick joke. Maybe I dozed off and dreamed the whole thing. But deep down, I know what I saw was real, and it wasn't any of those things. I've read about Bigfoot and Sasquatch since then, seen the documentaries and the blurry photos. Some descriptions match what I saw, but not entirely. The thing at my window didn't have the pointed head or the hair covering its face that you see in most Bigfoot stories. Its face was more exposed, more human-like in some ways, but definitely not human. What haunts me most isn't the fear I felt. It's the fact that it seemed to want something from me. That deliberate tap-tap on the glass wasn't threatening. It was like it was trying to get my attention, to establish some kind of connection. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd tapped back, or if I'd somehow been able to communicate with it. I've never gone camping since then. My wife thinks I'm just a city boy who doesn't like roughing it, and I let her believe that. How do you tell someone that you're afraid of running into something that most people don't even believe exists? I still dream about those eyes sometimes, looking at me through the glass. In my dreams, I'm not always afraid. Sometimes I'm just sad, like I missed an opportunity to understand something rare and important. I don't know what it was or why it came to my window that night. I don't know why it chose me to reveal itself to. All I know is that it was real, and for a brief moment, two completely different types of beings looked into each other's eyes and acknowledged each other's existence. I've never been back to Blade Lake, and I never will. But sometimes, when I'm in the car with my family and we drive past dense woods, I find myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see a large, blocky silhouette watching from behind a tree. And part of me wonders if it's still out there, tapping on windows in the night, trying to make a connection with someone who won't turn away. Story 2. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or myths. I'm a contractor from Victoria, practical, rational, feet firmly on the ground. At least that's who I was until March 30th, 2007. My wife Janet and I were driving from Port Alberni to Tofino for a weekend getaway. It was our 15th anniversary, and we'd booked a little cabin on the beach. The weather was unusually good for March on Vancouver Island. Sunny but cool, perfect for driving with the windows cracked. We'd been on the road for about 40 minutes. Anyone who knows that highway understands it's not exactly a straight shot. Lots of curves, dense forest on both sides, and in many places, a river running alongside. The road was pretty empty that Friday afternoon, which wasn't unusual for the off-season. Janet had dozed off in the passenger seat. She'd had a long week at work, so I was keeping the radio low and trying to take the curves gently. I remember checking the time. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and thinking we'd make it to Tofino with plenty of daylight left to walk on the beach. I came around this bend, one of those spots where the river runs really close to the road. There was a cluster of trees leaning out over the water. You know how they grow at these impossible angles sometimes. I noticed movement in one of the larger trees and automatically thought, bear. We see them often enough around here, and I figured it was a black bear maybe looking for berries or something. But as I got closer, and I was driving slowly because of the curve, I realized something was off. The shape was wrong, way wrong. What I initially thought was a bear was actually crouched on a thick branch that extended over the river. The branch was probably 15 feet above the water. The creature was balanced there, but not like a bear would be. It was squatting, almost like a human would, with one incredibly long arm hanging down toward the water. I slowed down even more, probably to about 30 kilometers per hour. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I also couldn't look away. The creature was massive, easily 7 feet tall if it had stood up straight. It was covered in dark, almost black hair that looked matted in some places. But it wasn't the size that shook me to my core, it was the face. As I got closer, the creature turned slightly toward the road, probably hearing my car. And that's when I saw it clearly in the afternoon sunlight. Its face wasn't anything like a bear's, not even close. It was wide and surprisingly flat, with a broad nose and deep-set eyes that looked aware, intelligent. The eyes were dark. I couldn't see the color exactly, but they weren't animal eyes. They registered me passing by. There was recognition there. I can't stress this enough. I know what bears look like. I've encountered dozens in my life on Vancouver Island. This wasn't a bear. The face was almost, well, the closest thing I can compare it to is like a gorilla or some kind of ape, but that doesn't quite capture it either. It was its own thing. I wanted to stop the car. I really did. But the highway there has narrow shoulders, and there was a small drop-off to the riverside. It wouldn't have been safe to pull over right there, and honestly, part of me was afraid. Not that it would attack us or anything, it seemed completely focused on what it was doing, but afraid of confronting something that shouldn't exist in these woods. As we passed, I kept watching in my mirror. The creature never moved from its position. It just shifted its attention back to the water below. That's when I realized it was fishing. Its long arm was suspended above the water, perfectly still, ready to snatch something. It was using a technique showing patience and purpose. Janet was still asleep. I didn't wake her. What would I even say? Hey, honey, I just saw Sasquatch fishing for lunch. I kept driving, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd just seen. Maybe it was a man in a suit, but the movement was too natural, too fluid. The way it balanced on that branch, no human could mimic that. Maybe a bear standing weird. But that face, I couldn't get that face out of my mind. About 10 minutes later, Janet woke up and immediately noticed something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. I remember her exact words because of how ironic they felt. I hadn't seen a ghost. I'd seen something much more physically present and impossible to explain away. I tried to tell her casually, like it was no big deal. I think I just saw something weird back there. But my voice cracked, and my hands were still trembling. "What kind of weird?" she asked, suddenly alert. I struggled to find the words. "Something in a tree by the river. It looked like it was fishing." "A bear?" "No." I swallowed hard. It wasn't a bear. I ended up pulling over at the next safe spot, a small turnout overlooking the forest. I needed a minute to collect myself. Janet was staring at me, concerned but also curious. "It was big," I finally said, "covered in dark hair, but it was squatting on this branch, hanging one arm down toward the water, like it was waiting to catch fish." Janet's expression changed from concern to skepticism. "Are you saying—" "I don't know what I'm saying," I cut her off. "I just know what I saw, and it wasn't anything I can explain." Part of me wanted to turn around, to go back and see if it was still there, to prove to myself and to Janet that I hadn't imagined it. But another part, the part that was still trying to process the intelligent eyes that had met mine, couldn't face seeing it again. We continued to Tofino, the rest of the drive. I kept scanning the tree line, the river when it was visible, looking for any sign of whatever it was. Janet tried to engage me in conversation, but I was distracted, replaying those few seconds over and over in my mind. That night, in our rental cabin, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the ocean waves should have been soothing, but all I could think about was that creature, the way it moved, the focus it had, the clear purpose in its actions. It wasn't random animal behavior, it was methodical, practiced. The next morning, I found myself on the cabin's porch with a cup of coffee, researching on my phone. Sasquatch sightings on Vancouver Island. There were more than I expected. Many described similar physical characteristics: the broad, flat face, the dark eyes, the matted hair. Some even mentioned seeing them near water sources, fishing, using tools, showing intelligence. Janet came out and sat beside me. She'd been patient, letting me process. "You really believe you saw something, don't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "I know how it sounds. I know the logical explanations. A bear standing weird, my mind playing tricks, maybe even someone playing a prank. But none of those fit what I saw." "So you think you saw Sasquatch?" I winced at the word. Before yesterday, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed that. Now, I shook my head. I don't know what to believe anymore. We tried to enjoy our anniversary weekend. We walked on the beaches, ate at nice restaurants, took photos of the stunning coastline. But there was this undercurrent of unease, at least for me. Every time we drove anywhere, I scanned the trees. Every time we walked near forest edges, I found myself listening intently for any unusual sounds. On the drive back to Port Alberni 2 days later, I deliberately slowed down when we approached the area where I'd had the sighting. Janet was fully awake this time, also scanning the tree line. But there was nothing unusual, just the river flowing, the trees swaying slightly in the breeze. "Would you recognize the exact spot?" Janet asked. "I think so," I replied, eyes fixed on the roadside. It was right after a sharp bend where the river comes really close to the road. When I thought we'd reached the spot, I slowed even more, much to the annoyance of the car behind us. The tree was there, the one that leaned out over the water, but no creature. "That's it," I said, pointing. "That's the tree where it was perched." Janet studied it carefully. "It would take something really strong to balance out there," she observed quietly. "Exactly," I said, feeling a small validation in her words. When we got home that evening, I couldn't shake the experience. I started researching more intensely. I found online forums where people shared similar encounters. I read books about Sasquatch sightings in the Pacific Northwest. I even contacted a local researcher who documented such reports, though I asked to remain anonymous. What struck me most in my research was how many sightings described intelligent behavior, tool use, fishing techniques, complex vocalizations. These weren't just random animal encounters, they suggested something with awareness, with culture even. It's been 16 years since that day, and I've never seen anything like it again, despite numerous trips on that same highway. I've never publicly shared my experience until now. I've told a few close friends, usually after a couple of beers, and received the expected mix of fascination and skepticism, but here's what I keep coming back to. That face, those eyes, the deliberate, patient way it was fishing. This wasn't a mindless animal acting on instinct. There was intent there, intelligence, purpose. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, if someone had told me this story before that day in 2007, I'd have nodded politely while thinking they were either lying or confused. But I know what I saw. It was real, it was there, and it changed how I understand the world around me. The forests of Vancouver Island are vast and dense. Most areas remain unexplored by humans. Is it really so impossible that something could live there, largely undetected? Something intelligent enough to avoid human contact? Something that's learned to fish from trees overhanging rivers? I don't have answers, just questions, and the unshakable memory of those few seconds when my understanding of what's possible fundamentally changed. Sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I find myself looking up into the trees, wondering if I'm being watched by those same intelligent eyes, wondering if somewhere in the dense forests of Vancouver Island, that creature is still there, still fishing from trees, still living a life parallel to, but separate from our own. Story 3. I still can't fully explain what I saw that night in 2019, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I've been an electrician for 15 years, working all over New South Wales. I've seen some weird shit on job sites, but nothing that keeps me up at night like this does. It was a Thursday in late August. I'd been out on a job near Wollongong, finishing up some electrical work at a property way out in the sticks. The homeowner had issues with power surges frying their appliances, and it took longer than expected to sort out. By the time I packed up my tools and headed out, it was already getting dark, around 8:30 in the evening. The drive back to Keoghley is mostly deserted forestry roads. No streetlights, barely any houses, and definitely no cell service. Just thick bush on both sides. I've driven that stretch dozens of times, but usually during daylight hours. That night was different. There was this heaviness in the air, like before a big storm, but the sky was clear. I had the radio on low, some football match I wasn't really paying attention to, and I was just thinking about getting home. My wife, Sarah, would have already fed the kids and put them to bed. She'd probably left dinner in the microwave for me. Just normal thoughts on a normal night. The road between Wollongong and Keoghley has these long, straight sections followed by sharp bends. I was coming around one of those bends, doing about 70 kilometers per hour, with my high beams on because it was pitch black out there. No moon that night, just stars. As I rounded the bend, my headlights swept across the road ahead, and that's when I saw movement on the left side. At first, I thought it was a roo. We get plenty of them jumping out on these roads. But this was different. Even from about 60 meters away, I could tell it was way too big for a kangaroo. It stepped onto the road from the left side. Not jumped, not ran, stepped on two legs, and the way it moved, Jesus. It crossed the entire width of the road in just 3 strides. 3. The road's easily 7 or 8 meters wide. When my headlights fully caught it mid-crossing, I instinctively eased off the accelerator. Time seemed to slow down. I got a clear look at whatever it was. This thing stood easily over 2 meters tall, probably closer to 3 if I'm honest. Its shoulders were twice as wide as mine, and I'm not a small bloke. The creature was covered in dark brown hair, not fur like a dog, but longer, almost shaggy hair. Where my headlights hit it directly, the hair had this reddish tint to it, not bright red, but like a dark auburn. Its arms were proportionally wrong. They hung down past its knees. I distinctly remember seeing muscles moving under that hair with each step. Powerful, rippling movements, like watching a bodybuilder walk, but fluid. The strangest part, it completely ignored me, didn't look at the car, didn't speed up or slow down, just maintained this deliberate pace across the road and disappeared into the bush on the right side. I hit the brakes and slowed down to maybe 20 kilometers an hour, scanning the trees where it had vanished. Nothing. It was gone. I couldn't see any movement in the undergrowth, couldn't hear anything over my engine, just darkness beyond my headlights. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. My heart was hammering in my chest. I kept thinking, what the fuck was that? What the actual fuck was that? Part of me wanted to get out and look. A bigger part, the part that was screaming about self-preservation, said absolutely not. I chose to listen to that part. I drove the rest of the way home in a daze, constantly checking my mirrors and scanning the roadside. Every shadow looked like it might step out onto the road. Every rustle of leaves in my peripheral vision made me flinch. I kept the radio off, straining to hear anything unusual over the hum of my tires on the asphalt. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to process what I'd seen, trying to come up with a rational explanation, a person in a costume, a bizarre optical illusion, some unknown animal. Sarah noticed something was off the moment I walked in. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I suppose I had. "You all right?" she asked, heating up my dinner in the microwave. "You look pale." I told her what happened, described the thing I'd seen crossing the road. As I spoke, I could see her expression change from concern to skepticism. "Maybe it was someone in one of those ghillie suits," she suggested. "You know what hunters wear, could have been poachers." I'd considered that already. "No way," I said. "This thing was huge. No human is that tall or moves like that. And those arms, they were all wrong." She gave me that look, the one that says she's humoring me but doesn't really believe me. I don't blame her. If the situation was reversed, I'd probably think she was exaggerating too. "Well, whatever it was, at least you're home safe," she said, sliding my dinner in front of me. I couldn't eat much that night. My appetite was gone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing crossing the road, those muscles moving under its hair. I barely slept. I kept replaying the sighting in my head, trying to make sense of it. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just a bizarre trick of the light. Almost. That Friday at work, I couldn't focus. I made stupid mistakes, forgetting tools, misreading wiring diagrams. My apprentice kept asking if I was sick. Maybe I was, in a way, sick with uncertainty. Over the weekend, I started researching. I've never been one for cryptids or conspiracy theories, but I needed answers. I found stories from other people in the region who claimed to have seen similar things. Most were dismissed as misidentified wildlife or outright fabrications, but some were eerily similar to my experience. The indigenous stories about the Yowie really got to me. The descriptions matched what I saw: tall, hairy, powerful. Some accounts mentioned the same reddish tint to the hair that I'd noticed. I drove back to that stretch of road on Sunday afternoon in broad daylight. I told Sarah I needed to pick up a part from a supplier, but really, I just wanted to see the spot again. I needed to know I hadn't imagined it. I found the bend where it happened and pulled over. The forest looked different in daylight, less menacing, more ordinary. I got out of the car and walked to where I thought the creature had entered the bush. The ground was hard and rocky, not the kind to hold footprints. Still, I searched for any sign: broken branches, disturbed vegetation, anything. About 10 meters in, I found something. A clump of hair caught on a thorny bush about 2 meters off the ground. It was dark brown with that same reddish tint I'd seen in my headlights. Too high up for a dog or a roo, too coarse for a horse. I took it, sealed it in a Ziploc bag I had in my glove box. I didn't tell Sarah about the hair. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That I found proof of some unknown creature? I'd sound crazy, but I keep that bag hidden in my tool chest in the garage. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, just to remind myself I'm not losing my mind. It's been over 4 years now since that night. I still drive that road sometimes for work, but only during daylight hours if I can help it. When I can't avoid it, I drive with one hand on the wheel and the other near the gear shift, ready to floor it if needed. I've read more accounts since then, from all over Australia. Some sound like drunken campfire stories. Others, like mine, are from regular people who have no reason to make this stuff up. People who, like me, wish they could unsee what they saw. The thing that haunts me most isn't just the creature itself. It's the casual way it ignored me, like my presence meant nothing, like humans weren't even worth acknowledging. That's what keeps me up some nights. The feeling that we're not as high on the food chain as we think we are. That there are things out there, just beyond our headlights, that we don't understand. I've never gone public with this story before now. My mates would take the piss, and I can't afford to be known as that crazy electrician who sees monsters. My business depends on people trusting my judgment, so I keep it to myself, mostly. Except for now, telling you lot. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, crossing roads in the darkness when no one's around. Or maybe there are more of them, a whole population living alongside us, just out of sight, hidden in the vast expanses of bush that cover this country. I don't have any dramatic conclusion to this story. No final confrontation or revelation. Just a brief moment where something impossible crossed my path and then vanished back into the night. But that moment changed how I see the world. It's like I glimpsed behind a curtain that most people don't even know exists. So if you're ever driving that stretch between Woodinbong and Kyogle late at night, keep your high beams on. And if you see movement at the edge of your lights, maybe don't slow down to look. Some things are better left in the darkness. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I know how it sounds, and I'm not the type to make up stories or exaggerate. I've been hunting these hills behind my property in Jones County for over 20 years, and nothing like this has ever happened before. But I need to tell someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. This happened on opening morning of black powder deer season last year, in November of 2022. I'd been planning this hunt for weeks, scouting the area and setting up trail cams. My spot is this perfect rock outcropping that overlooks a natural saddle in the hills. Deer funnel through there like clockwork during the rut. I woke up at 3:30 that morning, excited as always. The temperature was in the low 40s, perfect hunting weather with a slight breeze from the northwest. I got dressed in my scent lock suit, grabbed my muzzle loader, a Thompson Center I've had for years, and headed out around 4:15. I always give myself plenty of time to get to my spot, set up and settle in before first light. The moon was just a sliver that morning, so it was particularly dark. I used my headlamp on the low red setting to navigate the familiar path. I was about a quarter mile from my destination, moving slowly and quietly through the woods. when everything changed. I heard a sudden rustling in the tall grass to my right, maybe 30 yards away. At first, I thought it was just a deer bedded down that I'd spooked. But then I heard what sounded like something large, much larger than a deer, jumping up. Not just one something, but two. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard before, heavy bodies moving with surprising quickness. I instinctively flashed my light toward the noise, switching from red to white beam. What I saw froze me in place. Two pairs of eyes reflected back at me, bright orange-red, unlike the green-yellow reflection you get from deer. One set was incredibly high off the ground, easily 7 feet up. The other set was lower, maybe 5 feet high. I couldn't make out their bodies clearly in the darkness, just massive dark silhouettes staring directly at me. For a split second, we all just froze. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then they turned simultaneously and moved along the ridge at incredible speed, making these weird huffing sounds as they went. The way they moved was all wrong. Too fluid, too fast for their size. My first thought was bears, maybe a sow and a nearly grown cub. We have black bears around here, though they're not super common. I told myself that's all it was, just bears standing on their hind legs. I took a few deep breaths to calm down and continued toward my hunting spot, though I kept checking behind me every few steps. I reached my rock overlook around 5, still about an hour before legal shooting light. I got everything set up, my small hunting stool, my pack with snacks and water, my muzzle loader loaded and ready. I pulled on my ghillie suit over my scent lock suit for added concealment and settled in to wait for daylight. I'd also dragged a scent rag soaked in doe-in-heat urine behind me on the way in, standard practice during the rut. As the sky began to lighten ever so slightly, I started to relax. The woods were quiet, except for the occasional owl and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. That's when I heard something small hit the ground behind me with a soft thud. I figured it was just an acorn falling from a tree, but my instincts told me to check. I slowly turned around, and my blood ran cold. About 50 yards behind me, half hidden in the brush, was something. It was squatting down, watching me. Large, covered in black-brown hair or fur. Its face looked, I don't even know how to describe it, kind of like a monkey but much bigger, with a flatter face and deeper set eyes. It was holding another stick in what was unmistakably a hand. My first thought was that someone was playing a sick joke on me, some asshole in a costume trying to scare hunters on opening day. I stood up, raised my muzzle loader slightly, not pointing it directly at the figure but enough to show I was armed, and called out, "I can see you, this isn't funny, I'm armed and I will shoot if you come any closer." What happened next still gives me nightmares. Instead of running away or laughing it off, this thing stood up to its full height, at least 7 feet tall, and let out this deep, guttural sound that was like nothing I've ever heard come from a human throat. Then it charged toward me, not running on all fours like a bear, but on 2 legs, covering ground with shocking speed. Pure instinct took over. I aimed my muzzle loader at the ground about 10 feet in front of it and fired. The boom echoed through the hills, and a cloud of smoke obscured my vision for a second. When it cleared, the creature had stopped. It stood there, swaying slightly, staring at me with what I can only describe as intelligence. Not animal intelligence, but something that understood exactly what had just happened. Then it turned and ran about 75 yards back the way it had come, moving with this strange, loping gait. It stopped at the edge of a thick patch of brush and stood upright again. It looked toward the brush and made this deep grunt, like it was calling to something. That's when I saw the second figure emerge from the thicket, smaller, maybe 4 or 5 feet tall, moving with the same fluid motion, but making these high-pitched sounds that almost sounded like crying. The bigger one reached out an arm protectively, and the smaller one moved behind it. They both stared at me for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. I was frantically trying to reload my muzzle loader with shaking hands, dropping my powder measure in the process. By the time I looked up again, they were gone. Not just hidden, gone. No sound of them moving through the underbrush, no branches breaking. Just silence. I grabbed my pack, left my stool and some other gear, and got the hell out of there, half running, half stumbling down the ridge in the opposite direction. I've never moved so fast through those woods in my life. Every sound, every shadow seemed threatening. I kept expecting to feel a hand grab my shoulder from behind. I made it back to my truck and sat there for a long time, engine running, heater on full blast. Even though I wasn't cold, I was trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Bears? No way. The way they moved, the way they stood, the obvious communication between them. It wasn't bear behavior, a person in a costume who would be 7 feet tall, able to move that fast through rough terrain and have a smaller accomplice making those inhuman sounds. After a few hours of sitting there, part of me wanted to just forget the whole thing, pretend it never happened, but I'd left some expensive gear up there and I needed to go back. Not alone though. I called my buddy Mike and asked him to come with me, making up some story about thinking I'd wounded a deer. He agreed to meet me the next morning. We hiked up there together around noon the next day. I was jumpy the whole way, scanning the trees and brush constantly. When we reached my spot, my gear was still there, but it had been disturbed. My backpack was torn open and the food I'd packed, jerky, trail mix, a couple energy bars, was gone. Not just moved, but the wrappers were shredded and every bit of food was consumed. My hunting stool was intact, but my orange vest that I'd draped over a nearby branch was on the ground. The branch snapped clean off. The strangest thing, the scent-soaked drag rag I'd left tied to my pack was missing completely. Mike noticed some unusual tracks in the soft earth nearby, but the ground was too rocky and leaf-covered for clear footprints. I made up some story about coyotes getting into my pack, and we gathered my remaining gear and left. I haven't been back to that spot since. Haven't been able to bring myself to go hunting alone either. I've spent countless hours researching what I might have seen. Every description of Bigfoot encounters I've read matches what I experienced. The height, the movement, the sounds, the apparent parent-child relationship. I think what happened is that I accidentally walked between a mother and her young that morning in the dark. When I set up my blind, the younger one must have been watching me, and the mother came back to protect it. What's really been bothering me is why they approached me at all. The only explanation I can come up with is that my scent lock suit, combined with the doe urine I was using and the ghillie suit covering my human shape, might have confused them about what I was. Maybe they were curious. Maybe they thought I was an injured animal. I've been a hunter my whole life. I know what bears look like, how they move. I know what people in costumes look like. This was neither. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm still struggling to believe it myself. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget those eyes staring at me in the dark, or the way that thing looked at me after I fired my warning shot. Like it was sizing me up. Like it understood. Story 5. I've been debating whether to share this for years, not because I'm worried people won't believe me. Frankly, I don't care if you do, but because reliving it still makes my hands shake. But I need to put this down somewhere. I grew up in a hunting family outside Stockport, Ohio. Our land had been in the family for generations, about 80 acres of mixed woods, small meadows, and creek bottoms along the river. Nothing fancy. Just good hunting land that put meat in the freezer every fall. What happened in the fall of '76 changed how I look at those woods forever. It was early November, crisp but not freezing. Perfect deer hunting weather. I was 23 then, had been hunting since I was 12, so I knew every inch of our property. That morning, I'd set out before dawn, carrying my Winchester .30-06, the same rifle my grandfather had given me when I turned 16. I wore the usual. Heavy canvas pants, flannel shirt, blaze orange vest, and an old army jacket. Nothing special about my gear or the day, at least not then. By mid-morning, I'd worked my way to the east side of our property, where there's a long, narrow field that butts up against a thick tree line. This spot had always been good for deer, They'd often cross from the heavy woods to graze in the field. I was moving slow, scanning the area, when I noticed what I thought was someone standing at the far edge of the field. At first, I figured it was another hunter, maybe a neighbor who'd strayed onto our land by accident. It happened occasionally. No big deal. I raised my arm and waved, but the figure didn't respond. Strange, but not alarming. The person was a good 200 yards away, standing perfectly still where the field meets the trees. I whistled, not too loud, just enough to get attention. Nothing. I whistled again, louder this time. That's when I felt the first prickle of unease. The figure hadn't moved at all, not even to turn its head toward the sound, and something about its proportions seemed wrong. I raised my binoculars, and that's when my heart skipped. What I'd thought was a person in a dark coat was much bigger than any man I'd ever seen. It was tall, easily 7 feet, maybe more, and the shoulders were impossibly wide. But what really got me were the arms. They hung down almost to the knees, longer than any human arms should be. I lowered the binoculars, suddenly very aware of how exposed I was in that field. The figure still hadn't moved. It was just watching. I knew it was watching, even though I couldn't make out a face at that distance. I'm not one to spook easily. I've encountered bears, dealt with aggressive bucks during rut season, even had a run-in with a rabid fox once. But this was different. Everything in me was screaming to get away. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the figure, and then turned to head back to more familiar ground. Instead of taking the usual trail, I cut through an old, dried slough. Basically a shallow ravine that fills with water during spring floods, but stays dry most of the year. It would get me back to the center of our property faster. That's when I heard it, branches breaking somewhere behind me, not the light sound of a squirrel or even a deer, but heavy breaks, like something big was moving through the brush. I stopped. The sounds stopped too. I listened for nearly a minute, hearing nothing but my own breathing and the occasional bird call. Telling myself I was being ridiculous, I started walking again. After about 30 seconds, the sounds resumed, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but always just out of sight. Whatever it was pacing me, keeping the same distance. I stopped again. The sound stopped. I moved. It moved. My mouth went dry. I'd been hunting these woods my entire life and had never felt anything like this. The certainty that something intelligent was following me, tracking me, staying deliberately hidden. I picked up my pace, no longer caring about being quiet. The sounds behind me quickened too, still maintaining that same distance. Not close enough to see, but close enough to hear clearly. After what felt like forever, but was probably just 15 minutes, I reached the old logging road that cuts through our property. It's wider, more open, and I thought whatever was following me might be reluctant to leave the cover of the thicker woods. I was right. When I stepped onto the road, the sounds stopped completely. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, rifle ready, watching the tree line, but nothing emerged. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd let my imagination run wild after seeing what was probably just a bear standing on its hind legs at the field's edge. But deep down, I knew better. Bears don't follow you like that, don't match your movements with that kind of intelligence, and they certainly don't have the proportions of what I saw. I didn't hunt for the rest of that season. Told my dad I had pulled a muscle in my back. He didn't question it, but I think he knew something was up. I just couldn't bring myself to go back into those woods alone. For years afterward, I only hunted with my dad or my brother, never alone, and never on the east side of the property. I never told them why. How do you tell people you've known all your life that you're afraid of the woods you grew up in because you saw something that shouldn't exist? Eventually, the memory faded enough that I could convince myself it had been nothing, just a strange combination of light and shadow, my mind playing tricks. That changed in November 2008, 32 years later. By then, I was 55, divorced, my kids grown and moved away. I'd started hunting alone again years before, though I still avoided that east field whenever possible. It was a cold, grey November day. I'd set up near a game trail that comes out of a slough on the southeast part of our property. Not the same spot as before, but not far from it either. I was sitting against a large oak, perfectly still, watching the trail through a small gap in some sumac bushes. I'd been there maybe 2 hours when I saw movement down in the slough, about 40 yards away. At first, I thought it was a deer, a big buck maybe by the size of it. But as I focused, I realized with a sudden jolt that what I was seeing made no sense. It was something massive and black, crawling flat on its belly out of the creek bed. Not crawling like a bear or any four-legged animal I'd ever seen. It was using its arms and legs together, pulling itself up from the slough in a way that looked almost human, but completely wrong. Its arms were long, too long, and powerfully muscled. It moved slowly, deliberately, its body low to the ground, but clearly huge. I couldn't see its face, just the back of what looked like a head, covered in dark, matted hair or fur. I sat frozen, barely breathing, my rifle forgotten in my lap. The creature, I don't know what else to call it, pulled itself up onto level ground and paused. It was maybe 30 yards away now, and although it was crouched down, I could tell it was enormous. Easily 7 or 8 feet long from head to foot, with shoulders wider than any man I've ever seen. For a terrible moment, I thought it might turn toward me. My heart was hammering so hard, I was certain it must hear it. But it didn't turn. Instead, it began moving away from me, still in that strange belly-down crawl, disappearing into the brush without making a sound. The silence afterward was deafening. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just complete stillness, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. I sat there for I don't know how long, half an hour, maybe more, before I could make myself move. When I finally stood up, my legs were so shaky I had to lean against the tree for support. What terrifies me most about that second encounter wasn't just seeing the thing again after all those years. It was the realization that it had probably been there all along, living in these woods, moving through them unseen. How many times had I been out there, thinking I was alone, when I wasn't? People don't understand how thick the woods can get in the Ohio River bottoms. Trees grow close together, brush stands head high in places, vines and brambles create walls you can't see through. Something big could be 20 feet away and completely invisible if it wanted to be. I've tried researching what it might have been. I've read about Bigfoot sightings, watched those TV shows where they go looking for monsters in the woods. Some of the descriptions match what I saw, but none of the blurry photos or videos come close to capturing the sense of wrongness. The feeling that what I was looking at simply shouldn't exist. I still own that land, still hunt there sometimes, though never alone anymore, and never without a sidearm in addition to my rifle. My son thinks I'm paranoid in my old age. My brother jokes that I'm afraid of ghosts. Let them think what they want. I know what I saw. Twice now, 32 years apart, in the same stretch of woods that's been in my family for generations. I don't have explanations. I just have the memories, the impossible proportions of that figure at the field's edge, the sound of something following me through the brush, matching my every move, and worst of all, the sight of that massive, dark shape, pulling itself out of the slough with those 2 long arms. Sometimes at night, I still wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if it's out there, moving through those woods, wondering if it remembers me the way I remember it. Story 6. I've been debating whether to share this for years. It's been almost 20 years since it happened, but I still think about it all the time. I guess I'm ready now, though part of me still feels like people will just think I'm making this up. I'm not. I wish I was. This happened back in 2004 when I was working as a helilogger in the White Swan Lake area in British Columbia. For those who don't know what helilogging is, we basically get dropped off by helicopter in remote areas to cut timber that can't be reached by normal roads. It's hard work but pays well, especially for a college kid looking to make money during summer break. Our crew consisted of 6 guys, and we'd work in rotations, a week on, a week off. The area was beautiful but completely isolated. Just mountains, trees and wildlife. No cell service, no roads leading in. The helicopter was our only way in and out. The first strange thing happened about 3 weeks into the job. Nothing major, just a feeling of being watched that we all kept mentioning to each other. You know that prickly feeling on the back of your neck? Yeah, that. But we brushed it off. There are bears and cougars in those mountains, so being alert is normal. But then things started getting weird. We'd find our equipment move slightly from where we left it overnight. Once, all our lunches disappeared from the supply tent. We blamed each other at first, but everyone denied it. Then we started hearing these weird calls at night. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. Hard to describe, like nothing I'd ever heard before or since. But I'm stalling. What I really want to tell you about is what happened on that Thursday morning. It was August 26th, around 7:30 in the morning. The helicopter had just dropped me and my partner Dave off at our cutting site for the day. 2 other guys, Mike and Chris, were stationed at the landing site about half a kilometer away, while the remaining 2 were working another ridge. Dave and I were setting up our equipment when my radio crackled. It was Mike, and he sounded off. "Nathan, you guys need to see this," he said, his voice weirdly tight. "Look over at Ridge 6. Ridge 6 was what we called the mountain slope directly across from our main site. It was about 2 kilometers away, and we'd often see mountain goats traversing it. I set down my chainsaw and pulled out my binoculars, scanning the ridge. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the usual rocky slope with patches of vegetation. Then I spotted movement. Something brown was walking along the ridge. Something big, really big. "You seeing this?" Mike's voice came through the radio again. "Yeah," I managed to reply. My mouth had gone completely dry. It was walking on 2 legs. That's what hit me first. Not 4 legs like a bear or mountain lion. 2 legs, like a human, except it wasn't human. No human is that size. It was hard to judge the exact height from that distance, but comparing it to the trees and rocks around it, this thing had to be at least 11 feet tall, maybe taller, and it was covered in what looked like dark brown fur or hair. Dave grabbed the binoculars from me. His hands were shaking. "What the actual fuck is that?" he whispered. For about 20 minutes, we just stood there watching this thing walk along the ridge. Its gait was smooth, not jerky like someone in a costume. Its arms swung naturally at its sides, occasionally reaching out to steady itself on the steeper parts of the slope. Then it stopped, just froze completely, and slowly it turned its head in our direction. I still get chills thinking about this part. It was like it knew we were watching it. Even from that distance, I felt like it was looking right at us, not just in our general direction, at us specifically. It stood completely still for about 5 minutes, not moving a muscle, like it was trying to blend in with the surroundings. If it hadn't been so massive, it might have worked. The stillness was unnerving. My radio crackled again. "Choppers coming back," Mike said. He sounded relieved. We could hear the helicopter approaching, and I guess the creature heard it too. What it did next is something I'll never forget. As the helicopter came into view, the creature bent down smoothly, almost like it was touching its knees, then straightened back up. It was such a deliberate, controlled movement. Then it looked in our direction one more time. I glanced away for just a second as the helicopter passed overhead, and when I looked back, it was gone. Just vanished. On an open ridge with minimal tree cover, this massive being had disappeared in seconds. The 4 of us met up during lunch break and tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Chris suggested it might be someone playing a prank, but we all knew that was impossible. We were in the middle of nowhere. The only access was by helicopter, and all crew members were accounted for. Besides, no human could move like that or be that size. Mike was the one who finally said it out loud. It was a Sasquatch. Had to be. I'd always been skeptical about Bigfoot stories. They seemed like campfire tales or tourist traps to me, but after what I saw that day, I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something out there that science hasn't explained. We decided not to tell the other two guys right away, partly because we thought they might not believe us, and partly because we weren't sure what to believe ourselves. We agreed to keep our eyes open and see if anything else happened. For the next few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet, actually. No wildlife sounds at night, which was unusual. It was like everything was holding its breath. I went home for my week-off rotation, and when I came back, the first thing Mike told me was that they'd found tracks. 3 of them had been working in a new section and discovered several footprints in a muddy area near a creek. According to Mike, they were about 16 inches long and 7 inches wide, way bigger than any human foot. "Did you take pictures?" I asked immediately. Mike looked embarrassed. Battery was dead on my phone. Chris took measurements with his tape measure, though. I was disappointed but not surprised. That's how these things always go, right? The evidence is never quite there when you need it. But then it happened again, on my last day before heading back to school for the fall semester, August 31st. Dave and I were working on a newly constructed logging road. The ground was soft from recent rain. We were about to start cutting when Dave called me over. "Nathan, check this out." There, pressed clearly into the soft mud, were 4 distinct tracks, bipedal, walking in a straight line. They were approximately the same length as my size 12 boots, but much wider, with huge, spread-out toes. The stride length between them was impressive, much longer than what would be comfortable for a human. We stood there staring at those tracks for a long time. They looked fresh, probably from earlier that morning. "You think it's the same one we saw?" Dave asked quietly. I shook my head. "These seem smaller. Maybe it's a younger one." The thought that there might be more than one of these creatures in the area made my skin crawl. Not because I felt threatened exactly, but because it challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. We called the others over, and this time we did take photos. I still have them somewhere, though they don't really do justice to what we saw in person. The prints were so clearly defined. You could see the individual toes, the arch, the heel, not like a bear or any other animal I've ever seen. That was my last day in White Swan Lake. I went back to college and tried to put it all behind me, but I kept in touch with Mike, who stayed on for another month. He told me they continued to hear strange calls at night, and once found their equipment scattered all over camp, though nothing was damaged or missing. The logging company finished operations in that area by late October, and as far as I know, no one has reported similar sightings since. At least not officially. I've tried researching other Sasquatch sightings in that region and found a few reports from hunters and hikers that sound eerily similar to our experience. Same height estimates, same brown coloration, same ability to disappear quickly despite the creature's size. It's been almost 20 years, and I still don't have a good explanation for what we saw. I know what I saw. I know what we all saw. It wasn't a bear standing up. It wasn't a person in a costume. It wasn't a case of mistaken identity or a group hallucination. There was something out there in those mountains, something that walked on 2 legs, that stood nearly twice the height of a tall man, that moved with purpose and intelligence, something that knew we were watching it. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I probably wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I know what I saw, and nothing will ever convince me otherwise. I still work in forestry, though not helilogging anymore. Every time I'm in remote areas, I find myself scanning ridgelines, looking for that distinctive silhouette. I haven't seen it again, but sometimes when the forest goes quiet and that feeling of being watched creeps over me, I wonder if it's out there, watching from just beyond the tree line. And part of me hopes I'll see it again, just to prove to myself that I didn't imagine the whole thing. The other part hopes I never do. Story 7. I've been hesitating to share this for a long time. It's been about 4 years, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've told a few close friends, but I usually get those looks, you know the ones, like I'm making it up or had too much to drink. but I know what I saw that day in the summer of 2019, and it wasn't anything that should exist in Wyoming, or anywhere else for that matter. My name's Travis. I grew up around Bessemer Bend, just outside of Casper. My Aunt Caroline has this property out there, about 40 acres, with a mix of open field and pine forest backing up to BLM land. I've been riding four-wheelers out there since I was a teenager, so I know those trails like the back of my hand. It was early July, one of those perfect Wyoming summer days. Hot, but not too hot, maybe high 70s with a light breeze. I remember because I was wearing just a t-shirt, which I'd later regret not having more protection. I'd been helping Aunt Caroline fix a section of fence that morning, and after lunch, I decided to take my four-wheeler out for a ride. I headed down this old gravel road that cuts through her property and continues into public land. It's really just two tire tracks with grass growing in the middle, barely maintained. I wasn't going crazy fast, maybe 25 or 30 mph, just enjoying being out there. The road dips and rises with the terrain, giving you these moments where you can see pretty far ahead before dropping into the next shallow valley. I'd gone about 2 miles from the house when I topped one of these small rises, and that's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a big dog or maybe even a wolf, though wolves are pretty rare in that specific area. It was crouched down in a field to my right, maybe 200 yards away. I slowed down a bit, curious, more than concerned. We get all kinds of wildlife out there, deer, coyotes, the occasional mountain lion, so seeing animals isn't unusual. But as I got a bit closer, something felt off. The proportions weren't right for any animal I'd ever seen. Its shoulders were way too broad, and what I thought were front legs looked more like arms, actual arms. I slowed down even more, squinting against the sunlight, thinking maybe it was just some weird shadow playing tricks on me. That's when it stood up. I've never felt my blood run cold before, but that's exactly what happened. This thing was huge, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered in this dark reddish-brown hair, sort of like the color of dried blood. The hair wasn't uniform, though. It was thickest on its chest, arms and thighs. I could see dark skin underneath, in places where the hair was thinner, especially around the chest and shoulders. The most unsettling thing was how it moved. It wasn't like a bear standing up. This thing stood up like a person would, but with this weird fluid grace that shouldn't be possible for something that big. Its arms were massive, hanging low, almost to its knees. The muscle definition was visible even through the hair. This wasn't some scraggly creature. It looked powerful, like it could tear a person apart without effort. I killed the engine of my four-wheeler without even thinking about it. My hands just acted on their own. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other across the field. Its face was partially shadowed, but I could tell it was watching me. I couldn't make out facial details, just the general shape of a head that seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders with barely any neck. Then it moved. It took several deliberate steps toward the road, toward me, and stopped about 100 yards away. It just stood there in the middle of the gravel path, blocking my way forward. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Probably only seconds, but it felt like hours. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Suddenly it turned and ran toward the tree line on the left side of the road. It didn't run like a bear or any other animal. It ran upright like a human, but with this weird loping stride that covered ground incredibly fast. It disappeared into the pines in seconds. I sat there frozen, my hands gripping the handlebars of my four-wheeler so tight, my knuckles were white. I was trying to process what I'd just seen. A part of me was thinking, just turn around and go home, forget about this. But another part, the stupid part, was curious. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Was it just some weird bear, maybe some guy in a costume playing a prank? That's when I heard something hit the ground near me with a heavy thud. I looked over and saw a rock about the size of a grapefruit sitting in the dirt about 15 feet from my front tire. Before I could react, another rock flew past and bounced off a fence post with a loud crack. The sound snapped me out of my daze. I looked toward the tree line where the creature had disappeared and saw it partially hidden behind a pine tree. Only now it was closer, maybe 70 yards away. I could see one of its arms raised, holding what looked like another rock. The stance was unmistakably human, the way it cocked its arm back to throw. That's when it made a sound I'll never forget. It started as this deep, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through my chest more than I heard it with my ears. Then it grew louder, building into something between a roar and a scream. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt this primal fear wash over me. I'd heard cougars scream before and bears growl, but this was different. It felt directed, intentional, like it wasn't just making noise, it was communicating. Another rock flew past me, closer this time, and the creature growled again, even louder. That was enough for me. I yanked the starter on my four-wheeler, and it roared to life. I spun it around so fast I nearly tipped over, then gunned it back toward the main road. I was going way too fast for that terrain, bouncing all over the place, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified that this thing was chasing me. I swear I caught glimpses of movement through the trees parallel to the road, but it could have been my imagination at that point. I was in full panic mode. When I finally reached the main gravel road that led back to my aunt's house, I slowed down just enough to make the turn safely, then sped all the way back. I pulled up to her house in a cloud of dust and practically fell off the four-wheeler. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely turn off the ignition. Aunt Caroline came out onto the porch looking concerned. "Travis, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her everything, the words tumbling out of me in a rush. I expected her to laugh or tell me I was seeing things, but she didn't. She got real quiet and just nodded, listening to every detail. When I finished, she said, "You're not the first person to see something like that out here." Turns out, there had been stories from some of the local ranchers over the years. Strange noises at night, livestock acting spooked for no reason, a couple of hunters who refused to go back to a certain valley after something followed them for miles. Caroline had never seen anything herself, but she'd heard enough to not dismiss it outright. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside the window had me on edge. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to convince myself it was just a bear or maybe even a person messing with me. But I know what bears look like. I know what people look like. This wasn't either of those. The next day, I went back with my uncle's rifle, not to hunt it, just for protection. I couldn't find any tracks where I'd seen it standing, but the ground was pretty hard and rocky there anyway. I did find a few of the rocks that had been thrown at me. They weren't special, just regular stones from the area, but some were hefty enough that they would have done serious damage if they'd hit me. I've done a lot of reading since then. Turns out rock throwing is a pretty common behavior in reported Bigfoot encounters. Some researchers think it's a warning, a way of saying, "Get out of my territory," without direct confrontation. That fits with what happened to me. It didn't chase me when I ran, it just wanted me gone. I've been back to my aunt's place plenty of times since then, but I never ride alone anymore, and I don't go down that particular road. Sometimes at night when I'm staying out there, I'll hear something moving around in the dark, something big, and occasionally there's a smell, kind of musty and wild, like wet dog but stronger, more primitive. I don't tell many people about what happened. Wyoming's a pretty no-nonsense kind of place, and saying you saw a Sasquatch is a good way to get laughed out of the room, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, it was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but does. Sometimes I think about going back with a camera, trying to get proof, but then I remember that sound it made and how it felt to have those rocks flying at me, and I decide some things are better left alone. Whatever it was, it made its point clear. That's its territory, not mine. I still get the chills when I think about those few moments when we just stared at each other across that field. There was intelligence in that encounter, not just animal instinct. It knew exactly what it was doing with those rocks. It knew exactly how to scare me away. And it worked. To this day, whenever I'm in the woods and hear a twig snap or rocks clatter, my heart rate spikes, because now I know what's out there, watching from the shadows, and I know it doesn't want to be found. Story 8. I've been hesitating to write this down for years, but I need to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. This happened back in September of 2007, and to this day, I still get nightmares about it. I've been hunting all my life. Grew up doing it with my dad in Alberta's backcountry since I was 12. By 2007, I was 32 and had been hunting solo for over a decade. I knew the wilderness, understood animal behavior, and had never felt truly afraid in the bush before. That changed after my trip near Swan Hills. I'd planned a 5-day moose hunting trip in a remote area about 20 kilometers northeast of Goose Mountain. It's seriously isolated. We're talking dense forest, deep valleys, and probably no human footprints for months or years in some spots. The kind of pristine wilderness that makes Alberta special, but also the kind that demands respect. I parked my truck at an old logging road access point and hiked about 4 hours in. Found a nice flat ridge above a small creek. Perfect spot with good visibility of a valley where I'd seen moose sign in previous seasons. Set up my tent, organized my gear, and felt that familiar peace that comes with being alone in nature. The first day went great. Spotted 2 moose, but no clean shots presented themselves. Weather was perfect. Cool September air, leaves just starting to turn. I remember feeling so content that evening, cooking some freeze-dried pasta on my small stove and having a couple swigs of whiskey from my flask. The second day was similar. Good hunting, though no shots taken. I was in no rush, had another simple dinner and got a small campfire going around 9 that evening, just sitting there, enjoying the flames, when I heard it. A loud crack about 50 yards down the slope. At first I thought, moose or elk, but something felt off immediately. The sound wasn't right. When moose or elk break branches, there's usually movement before and after. This was different. One sudden, powerful snap of what must have been a thick branch, then nothing, like whatever made that sound just stood there perfectly still afterward. I grabbed my headlamp and shined it down the slope, but saw nothing. I listened harder, and that's when I heard the breathing. Deep, steady breathing, not panting like a predator, but measured, controlled breaths, like a person trying to stay quiet, but unable to completely silence their respiration. "Hello?" I called out. "Someone there?" No response, but the breathing stopped. Then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving away. Not the 4-beat pattern of a moose or bear, but a distinct 2-beat pattern, like a man walking. Except no hunter would be this deep without a vehicle, and no one would approach another hunter's camp without announcing themselves. I stayed up late that night with my rifle across my lap. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I slept for a few hours. But I was up before dawn, feeling uneasy. The third day is when things got truly frightening. I went hunting as planned, moving quietly through my intended area, but all day I felt watched, followed. The forest would go completely silent when I stopped moving. No birds, no squirrels. When I'd stand perfectly still for several minutes, I'd hear twigs snapping behind me. Each time I'd spin around, nothing would be there. At one point, I turned quickly and caught a whiff of something that made my stomach turn. The most putrid stench I've ever encountered, like rotten meat mixed with wet dog fur, and something else I can't even describe. It was so thick I could taste it. Then it was gone, like whatever carried that smell had moved downwind. By evening, I was seriously unsettled. I decided to move my camp closer to the creek, thinking maybe I'd feel safer with the sound of running water nearby. Maybe whatever was out there wouldn't cross the water. Stupid, I know, but I was grasping at anything that might help. I ate a cold dinner that night. Didn't want to make a fire or use my stove. Wanted to be as inconspicuous as possible. Climbed into my tent around 8 and tried to sleep with my rifle right beside me. Must have dozed off eventually because I woke with a start around midnight. Something was outside my tent. Something big. I could hear it circling my camp, not quickly but methodically, breathing heavily through what sounded like a congested nose, occasionally making these low grunting sounds unlike anything I'd heard before. Then the tree slapping started. That's the only way I can describe it. Whatever was out there would approach a tree and hit it with tremendous force. I could hear bark cracking. Between these displays of strength, it would pause near my tent. The breathing would get louder, then it would move to another tree. I was paralyzed with fear, but I knew I had to see what was out there. With shaking hands, I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see shadows moving between the trees. Dark, massive shadows, and that smell. It hit me like a physical force, making my eyes water and my throat constrict. What happened next still gives me cold sweats. The thing charged my tent, not like a curious bear batting at it, but a deliberate rush with what felt like rage behind it. The impact nearly collapsed the whole structure, sending me sprawling backward. As it hit the tent, it let out a roar that I can only describe as primal. Deeper than a bear, louder than anything I'd ever heard, with this horrifying, almost human quality to it. I screamed and fired a warning shot through the tent roof. The creature jumped back, making these bizarre, whooping, barking sounds as it retreated. I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, breaking small trees as it went. But it didn't go far. Maybe 50 yards away, it stopped. I could still hear it breathing. That's when I made the decision to abandon everything except my rifle, headlamp, compass, and the clothes on my back. I burst out of the tent and just started walking as fast as I could toward where I'd parked my truck, navigating by moonlight and checking my compass obsessively. All night, I heard it paralleling me through the forest, never getting too close, but never leaving either. Just keeping pace, occasionally making those unnerving, whooping calls. The stench would waft over me when the wind changed direction. I hiked non-stop through the night, fueled by pure adrenaline. When dawn finally broke, I was within a kilometer of my truck. The sounds had stopped about an hour earlier. I made it to my vehicle, hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I never went back for my gear. Over $2,000 worth of equipment left behind, and I couldn't care less. My dad said I was crazy when I told him, suggested it was just a bear. But bears don't stand on 2 feet for extended periods. They don't pace in circles around your camp. They don't break trees just to show they can. Whatever was in those woods that night wasn't afraid of an armed human. It wasn't just curious. It was toying with me, testing me. I've hunted all over Alberta since then, but never alone, and never near Swan Hills. Some people call me paranoid now, but they weren't there. I've read reports about Sasquatch sightings in Western Canada, used to laugh at them. I don't laugh anymore. I don't know what stalked me for those 3 days, but I know it wasn't any recognized animal species. Sometimes I still wake up at night thinking I can smell that distinctive stench in my bedroom. My wife says I thrash in my sleep, mumbling about something circling our house. The human mind wants explanations, wants to categorize experiences, but some things defy easy explanations. Whatever was in those woods knew exactly what it was doing. It was intelligent, calculating, and for whatever reason, it decided to let me leave its territory alive. I still hunt, still love the wilderness, but something fundamental changed in me after that trip. There's a certain innocence you lose when you realize you're not always at the top of the food chain, when you understand that there are things in the deep woods that don't fit into our neat scientific classifications. I don't expect everyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it myself if I hadn't lived through it, but I know what I experienced, and nothing will ever convince me it was just a bear. Something stalked me in those woods, something that walked on 2 legs, that could snap thick branches with minimal effort, that made calculated decisions about how to intimidate me. I've never gone public with this story before now. My hunting buddies know a sanitized version, and my wife knows I had a scary encounter with something. But this is the first time I've written down the full account. Maybe putting it into words will help the nightmares stop. Or maybe someone else has had a similar experience near Swan Hills and can tell me I'm not alone in what I saw. All I know for certain is that I won't be hunting alone again, and I check my tent zippers obsessively every time I camp now, even in my backyard with the kids. Some fears never fully leave you once they take root. Story 9. I've never told this story outside of close family, but something inside me needs to get this off my chest. I'm not looking for validation or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to share what happened to us that night in the early 80s. My wife Sarah and I used to love spending weekends at Sandy Cooper Lake in South Carolina. My sister had this small but cozy cabin about half a mile from the water. Nothing fancy, just a two-bedroom place with a screened porch and one of those old wood-burning stoves that would keep you toasty even when the temperature dropped. We'd go fishing, hike the trails, or sometimes just sit on the dock with a couple beers watching the sunset. It was our escape from the regular 9-to-5 grind. We'd drive down Friday after work and head back late Sunday, usually after dinner at my sister's place. She made this incredible pot roast that I still dream about sometimes. This particular Sunday in the fall of '82, we stayed later than usual. My sister had made apple pie from scratch, and then we got talking about my nephew's college plans. Before we knew it, it was already past 10. Sarah was getting antsy about the drive home. She had an early meeting the next morning, and we both had work, so we packed up our stuff, said our goodbyes, and hit the road around 10:30. It was a dark night. The kind of darkness you only get out in rural areas where there's no light pollution. We were in our Jeep Wagoneer, not the fancy one, mind you, just the basic model with the wood panels on the sides. The heater worked great though, which was all that mattered on chilly autumn nights. Highway 97 was completely deserted that time of night. We hadn't passed another car since turning off my sister's road. Sarah was dozing off in the passenger seat while I drove, the radio playing softly, some oldies station that came in and out of static as we wound through the hills. The headlights cut through the darkness, catching the occasional reflective eyes of deer or raccoons off in the distance. We were about 15 miles past Liberty Hill in one of the most remote stretches of the drive. Nothing but dense woods on both sides of the road. No houses, no gas stations, no signs of civilization for miles in either direction. Just tall pines and oaks pressing in on both sides of the highway. I remember checking the clock on the dashboard. It was 11:07. I remember that detail exactly because I was calculating what time we'd get home and how much sleep I could squeeze in before my alarm went off for work. That's when I saw it. About 50 feet ahead, something emerged from the tree line on the right side of the road. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in familiar terms. A bear, maybe, or a person in a coat, but within seconds I knew it wasn't either of those things. Jesus Christ. I hit the brakes hard, the Jeep's tires squealing slightly on the asphalt. Sarah jolted awake, startled by the sudden stop. What is it?" she asked, disoriented from being woken up. I couldn't speak. I just pointed ahead through the windshield, my hand shaking. The headlights illuminated it clearly. It was walking upright across the road. Not running, not hurrying, just walking deliberately, like it owned that stretch of highway. It crossed both lanes in what seemed like just 3 long strides. Its arms swung at its sides, too long for its body, hands nearly reaching its knees. The size of this thing, I'm 6 feet tall, and this creature would have towered over me by at least half a foot, maybe more. It had this powerful build, broad shoulders, thick chest, muscular looking even under all that hair. And there was hair, dark brown or black, covering its entire body. Not fur exactly, more like hair, but thicker and shaggier than human hair. Just before it reached the trees on the other side of the road, it turned its head toward our car. I'll never forget that face as long as I live. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a costume. It was something in between. Not fully human, not fully animal. It had this big nose, deep-set eyes that caught the headlights for just a second, and a prominent brow ridge. There was intelligence in those eyes, recognition, awareness. And then it was gone, disappeared into the trees on the left side of the road. The whole encounter couldn't have lasted more than 6 or 7 seconds, but it felt like time had slowed down, like each second stretched out forever as my brain struggled to process what I was seeing. Sarah was gripping my arm so tight her nails were digging in. "Did you see that?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. I think so," she said. "What was it, Michael?" I didn't answer. Instead, I put the Jeep in park and reached for the glove compartment where I kept a heavy flashlight. Sarah grabbed my arm again. "What are you doing? Don't get out there." "I just want to look. I need to know." "No, Michael, let's just go. Please." I ignored her. I needed to know I wasn't losing my mind. I took the flashlight, got out of the Jeep, leaving the headlights on and the engine running. The night air was cold against my face, silent except for the idling engine and the faint sound of crickets in the distance. I walked cautiously to where it had crossed. The narrow shoulder of the road was mostly gravel, giving way to dirt and pine needles as it merged with the forest floor. I swept the flashlight beam across the ground, looking for tracks, for anything. Nothing. The pine needles were undisturbed. If something that size had just walked through here, shouldn't there be some sign? I moved the beam of light toward the tree line, illuminating the first few yards of forest. Dense underbrush, fallen logs, nothing unusual. But then I noticed something odd, about 20 feet in. Several small saplings were bent at an unnatural angle, as if something had pushed past them recently. They were still slowly returning to their original position, the branches quivering slightly. Something had gone through there, something big. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I wasn't imagining things. I backed up toward the Jeep, keeping the flashlight pointed toward the woods until I was safely back in the driver's seat. Sarah was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Did you find anything?" she asked. "Some disturbed vegetation, nothing conclusive." I didn't want to scare her more than she already was. "I only saw it for a second when I woke up," she said. "But it was big, wasn't it? And walking on 2 legs." I nodded, putting the Jeep in drive. "Yeah, it was." "What do you think it was?" Her voice had a slight tremor. "I don't know. But I had my suspicions. We'd heard stories from the locals, things that lived in the deeper parts of the forest. Things that weren't supposed to exist." We drove the rest of the way home in near silence, both lost in our thoughts. I kept scanning the roadside, half expecting to see it again, but there was nothing, just the empty highway stretching ahead of us. When we got home, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a bear with mange that made it look less furry. Maybe it was some kind of prank, some local kids with a costume trying to scare motorists. We came up with all sorts of explanations, each less convincing than the last. But deep down, we both knew what we'd seen didn't fit any normal explanation. The next day, I called my sister and casually asked if she'd ever heard stories about strange creatures in the woods around Sandy Cooper Lake. She laughed and said, of course, all the local kids grew up hearing tales about the Liberty Hill Beast or the Cooper Lake Wildman. She thought I was just making conversation. I didn't tell her what we'd seen. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. Who would believe us? But over the weeks that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started reading books from the library about cryptozoology, about reported sightings of similar creatures. The descriptions matched what we'd seen with eerie similarity. The height, the build, the way it moved. We kept going to my sister's cabin after that, but I always made sure we left well before dark. And when we did have to drive home at night, I'd white-knuckle the steering wheel the entire way, eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Sarah would pretend to be asleep, but I could tell by her breathing that she was wide awake, watching too. About 3 months after our encounter, I finally worked up the courage to go back to that spot in daylight. I told Sarah I was going fishing, but instead I parked at the approximate location and walked into the woods where the creature had disappeared. I didn't find anything definitive. No footprints, no hair samples, nothing that would convince a skeptic. But I did notice something strange. In that section of forest, in a rough path leading away from the road, many of the trees had claw marks on them. Not fresh ones, but old scars in the bark at about 7 feet high. Some of them looked years old, others more recent. Something had been marking this territory for a long time. I never went back to that spot alone again. Over the years, I've read accounts from other people who've had similar experiences in those woods. Some of the stories match ours almost exactly. The same stretch of Highway 97, the same casual stride across the road, the same brief look toward the vehicle. It's like this thing has a routine, a territory it patrols, and sometimes humans happen to cross its path. We still visited my sister's cabin until she sold it in the early 90s, but we never saw the creature again. Sometimes I wonder if that's because we were lucky or because it was avoiding us. That intelligence I saw in its eyes, it knew what we were. It recognized us as something to be avoided. Sarah and I don't talk about it much anymore. It's been over 40 years now, and the memory has faded somewhat, but sometimes, when we're driving on a dark, rural road, I'll notice her sitting up a little straighter, eyes fixed on the tree line. And I know she's remembering too. I've never been able to fully explain what we saw that night. Was it what some people call Bigfoot? Maybe. Was it some unknown species living in the remote areas of South Carolina? Possibly. Or was it something else entirely? Something that doesn't fit neatly into any category we have? All I know for certain is what I saw with my own eyes. A large, hair-covered bipedal creature with an almost human face crossed Highway 97 in front of our Jeep on a cold autumn night in '82. It moved with purpose and intelligence. It acknowledged our presence, and then it vanished into the darkness, leaving nothing behind but questions and a lingering sense of unease that stayed with me for decades. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I'm not sure I would believe it myself if someone else told me this story. But it happened. Sarah and I were there. And whatever that thing was, it's probably still out there in those woods, crossing that lonely stretch of highway when it thinks no one is watching. Story 10. I still wake up at night sometimes, sweating through my sheets, that stench somehow finding its way back into my nostrils. It's been 16 years since that day in the Swan Lake area, but I swear it feels like it happened yesterday. I've hunted in the British Columbia wilderness my whole life, 35 years of experience before that day, and nothing had ever rattled me like this. It was mid-September of 2007. I remember because I'd just turned 54 that summer, and my buddies had joked that I should start taking it easy, maybe consider retirement from our annual hunts. Fat chance of that happening. I've been tracking game since I was a teenager, taught by my father who learned from his father. The wilderness is where I feel most at home. That particular day started like any other hunting trip. I'd driven out before dawn, parked my truck at an access point I've used for years, and hiked about 4 miles in. The morning air was crisp. You know, that perfect fall temperature where your breath just barely shows, but you're comfortable in a decent jacket. The Swan Lake area had always been good to me, plenty of deer sign that season, and I was hoping to fill my tag early. By early afternoon, I'd been on the move for hours without much luck. I decided to take a short break on this fallen tree trunk in a small clearing. The sun was filtering through the canopy, creating those dappled patterns on the ground. I pulled out a chocolate bar from my pack, one of those simple pleasures that taste 10 times better when you're out in the woods, and just sat there, enjoying the moment of peace. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that my friends thought I'd ever give this up. That's when everything changed. The smell hit me first. God, that smell. If you've spent any time in the woods, you know all the usual scents. The musty decay of fallen leaves, the sharp tang of pine sap, even the unmistakable funk of bear scat or a rotting carcass. This was something else entirely. It was like someone had taken a wet dog, rolled it in a month-old carcass, added a dash of sewage, and then let it bake in the sun. My stomach turned instantly. I've field-dressed countless animals and been downwind of some truly rank stuff. But this odor made me stop eating mid-bite. It wasn't just strong, it felt invasive, like it was coating the inside of my nose and throat. My first thought was bear, but even the rankest black bear I'd ever encountered didn't smell like this. This was wrong, unnatural. I slowly lowered the chocolate bar back into my pocket and rose to my feet, trying not to make any sudden movements. My heart was already beating faster, and I felt that primal surge of adrenaline starting to creep in, that ancient warning system telling me something wasn't right. I scanned the tree line methodically, the way I'd done thousands of times before. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a stand of younger trees, was a figure. Not an animal, at least not like any I'd ever seen, but a figure, standing fully upright, watching me. My first crazy thought was, who the hell would be out here without orange during hunting season? But as my eyes focused, I realized this was no hunter. The thing stood well over 7 feet tall. Its body was massive, not fat, but thick and powerful looking, with shoulders twice the width of mine. What struck me most were its proportions. They were all wrong. Its arms hung unnaturally long, past its waist, ending in what looked like hands, not paws. And the hair, God, the hair, dark brown or black, matted in places, covering its entire body, except for parts of what I guess you'd call its face. We just stared at each other. Time seemed to stretch out forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in my ears. A chickadee called somewhere to my right, oblivious to what was happening. I slowly, very slowly, reached for my rifle that was leaning against the log beside me. That slight movement broke whatever spell had held us both frozen. The creature moved, and how it moved still haunts me. Not on all fours like a bear would drop down to run, but on 2 legs, like a person. Except no person moves that fast through dense underbrush. It was there 1 second, and then just gone, a blur of dark motion disappearing into the forest. I heard branches snapping, undergrowth crashing, and then nothing. Just the sudden, deafening silence of the woods. I stood there with my rifle half raised, useless, my hands shaking so badly I probably couldn't have hit a barn door. The stench lingered, though it gradually began to fade. My mouth was bone dry, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 30. Eventually, I managed to get my shit together enough to check my surroundings and make sure the thing was really gone. I even considered tracking it, following those broken branches. The thought lasted about half a second before common sense kicked in. Whatever that was, I wanted no part of following it deeper into the woods. Instead, I packed up my gear with trembling hands and got the hell out of there, constantly checking over my shoulder. I've never walked so fast in my life, practically jogging the 4 miles back to my truck. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush had me spinning around, rifle ready. By the time I reached my vehicle, my shirt was soaked with sweat, despite the cool weather. I sat in my truck for a long time, engine running, heater on full blast, trying to stop the shaking. I kept replaying what I'd seen, trying to rationalize it. A bear with mange, some kind of deformed moose. But I knew better. I've seen every animal in these woods, healthy and sick, in every season and condition. This was something else. The drive home is mostly a blur. I remember stopping at a gas station and catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked like I'd seen a ghost. In a way, I guess I had. When I got home, my wife took one look at me and knew something was wrong. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words. She thought I was having some kind of breakdown, or maybe had gotten into something bad out there. Can't blame her. I probably sounded completely unhinged. I've never been one for the supernatural, all those Bigfoot stories, Sasquatch legends. I've rolled my eyes at them for decades, called them campfire tales to scare tourists and kids. I was the guy who'd laugh and say, I've spent more time in these woods than anyone, and there's nothing out there that can't be explained. Funny how quickly decades of certainty can be wiped away in a few seconds. In the days after, I scoured the internet for similar encounters, found more than I expected from the White Swan Lake area, spent hours on forums reading accounts from other hunters, hikers and locals. Some sounded exactly like what I'd experienced. The smell, the height, the way it moved. It was both comforting and terrifying to know I wasn't alone. I went back out hunting the next weekend. My wife thought I was crazy, but I had to. Had to prove to myself I wasn't afraid of the woods now, but I'd be lying if I said I hunted the same way. I found myself constantly alert, constantly sniffing the air. Every shadow between trees made my heart skip. I avoided the exact spot where I'd seen it, choosing a different section of forest altogether. 16 years have passed since that September day. I've continued hunting, couldn't give it up if I tried. But I've never been back to that specific area of White Swan Lake. Call it respect, call it fear. I don't really care. I also don't hunt alone anymore. Always bring at least one buddy. Told them it's because I'm getting older and want someone around in case my knees give out. They believe it. Easier than explaining the truth. I've never seen the creature again, but I've had moments, brief, terrifying moments, where that smell returns. Just a hint of it on the wind, gone almost before I register it. When that happens, I don't stick around to investigate. I quietly pack up and move to another spot, putting distance between myself and whatever might be watching from the trees. What was it? I don't know. Don't really want to put a name to it. Naming things makes them less frightening somehow, and I never want to forget that fear. It's kept me alert, kept me alive maybe. All I know is that there are things in these woods that defy explanation, things that have existed alongside us without our knowledge or understanding. The most unsettling part. Sometimes I get this feeling like our brief encounter wasn't random, like it was as surprised to see me as I was to see it. Two species that aren't supposed to cross paths, suddenly face to face in a world that's shrinking for both of us. And sometimes, in my darker moments, I wonder if it's out there right now, telling its own version of this story to others of its kind. So that's it. That's what happened that day in 2007. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, sometimes I still try to convince myself it was just a bear or some other normal forest animal seen in poor light. But then I remember that stench, those proportions, the way it moved, and I know what I saw wasn't something science has a neat little classification for. I still hunt these forests, still love the wilderness, but I'll never again claim to know everything that lives in these woods. Some mysteries are better left unexplained, some creatures better left unencountered. Story 11. I've never been one for sharing my life online, but I need to get this off my chest. It's been 21 years, and I still don't have an explanation. My son and I both saw it, clear as day, in broad daylight. And to this day, neither of us can explain what ran across our field that summer afternoon. This happened in July of 2002. We had this little house just outside Fort Garland, Colorado. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. The house sat on a slight rise that looked out over a flat field that stretched east toward the San Cristo Mountains. It was beautiful country, open skies, wide spaces, and that incredible mountain backdrop. The kind of place where you feel like you can breathe. That day started like any other summer day. Hot, bright, with that dry Colorado air that makes everything feel crisp and clear. My son, He was 10 at the time, was on summer break, so he was home with me. My husband James was at work in town. It was mid-afternoon, around 3 or so. I was at the kitchen sink washing dishes from lunch while my son sat at the kitchen table drawing or doing some craft project. I can't remember exactly what he was working on. What I do remember, with absolute clarity, is what happened next. Our kitchen window faced east, looking out over that field. I was just scrubbing a pan when something caught my eye. Movement out in the field, something dark moving quickly across the grass. At first, I thought it was someone's dog that had gotten loose. We had neighbors scattered around, though not close, and occasionally their pets would wander, or maybe it was a person taking a shortcut across our land, but within seconds, I realized it wasn't either of those things. "Mom," my son said suddenly, "what is that?" So he'd seen it too. I stopped washing and we both just stood there staring out the window. Whatever it was moving fast. Really fast, and it wasn't running on all fours like a dog. It was upright, completely upright, but it wasn't a person, no way. It was too different. The creature was covered in short, dark black hair. Not fur exactly, at least not like a bear's fur. More like, I don't know how to describe it except to say it looked like a chimpanzee's coat, but darker, pitch black. It moved with these long, quick strides across the field, arms swinging low at its sides. We were about 100 yards away, but the visibility was perfect that day. Not a cloud in the sky, no heat shimmer, nothing to distort our vision, and we were looking down at it from our slight elevation, which gave us a clear view of its entire path. The thing never slowed down, never changed direction, just bolted straight east across the field, through the tall grass. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. And the speed. I've never seen anything move like that. Not a person, not an animal. It covered ground incredibly fast. "What is it doing?" my son whispered. I didn't answer because I had no idea. We just kept watching. The creature reached the drainage ditch that marked the eastern edge of our property, a natural boundary between our field and the hills that eventually rose toward the mountains. Most people or animals would slow down there, maybe look for a place to cross. This thing didn't even pause. It just disappeared into the ditch and never emerged on the other side, at least not that we could see. We stood frozen at that window for what felt like forever, waiting for it to reappear somewhere. But it never did. It was just gone. The whole sighting probably lasted less than a minute. What struck me afterward was how silent it all was. The thing made absolutely no sound that we could hear. No barking, no growling, no calls. It appeared and vanished without a sound, and there was something unsettling about how deliberately it moved. Not like it was fleeing from something, but like it was late for an appointment. My son and I looked at each other, both trying to process what we'd just seen. "Was that a bear?" he asked, but his voice told me he already knew it wasn't. "No," I said. "Bears don't run like that." "It looked like a really big monkey," he said, and honestly, that was the closest comparison either of us could make. But we both knew there weren't supposed to be any monkeys, especially ones that size, running wild in Colorado. When James got home that evening, we immediately told him what we'd seen. I could tell he didn't believe us, not really. He listened and nodded, but I saw that look in his eyes, the one that says, "You must have been seeing things." "A black monkey, huh?" he said, and that became his little joke for years afterward. "Remember when you guys saw that black monkey in the yard?" But my son and I never wavered in what we saw. We compared notes right after it happened to make sure we were seeing the same thing, and our descriptions matched exactly. That wasn't a person in a costume, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't any animal native to Colorado that I know of. The next day, I drove into town and discreetly asked around if anyone had reported any exotic animals missing. No one had. I checked the local paper for the next few weeks. Nothing. I even called the county sheriff, making up some story about being worried about my chickens. We didn't even have chickens. No reports of anything unusual. Over the next few weeks, I found myself constantly looking out that kitchen window, hoping or maybe dreading to see it again. I started taking binoculars when I went to hang laundry outside. My son didn't want to play in the field for the rest of that summer. We never saw it again. Back then, that land behind our house was pretty wild. The drainage ditch led to undeveloped wilderness that stretched for miles. Today, it's all built up. Houses, fences, roads. The wilderness has been pushed back. Sometimes I wonder if whatever we saw that day has been pushed back too, deeper into what remains of the wild places. I've spent years trying to explain it. Could it have been a person in a costume, in the middle of nowhere, running at top speed through uneven terrain in the summer heat? Why? And how did they disappear so completely? A bear? Bears don't run upright for that distance or with that gait. The arms were all wrong for a bear too. Some kind of large primate, but that would mean there were apes or monkeys living wild in Colorado, which seems even more far-fetched. The internet wasn't what it is now back in 2002. It wasn't until years later that I started researching and came across accounts of Bigfoot sightings. Many described creatures much larger than what we saw, but some details resonated. The speed, the purposeful movement, the way it disappeared. But I hesitate to even use that word, Bigfoot. It comes with so much baggage, so many hoaxes and ridiculous TV shows. What we saw wasn't some giant lumbering monster from a blurry photo. It was something real that moved with intelligence and purpose. My son is an adult now. We don't talk about it often, but when we do, his memory matches mine exactly. Sometimes I wonder if I imagined it all. But then I remember, he saw it too. Whatever ran across our field that day was real. James still doesn't really believe us. He says we probably saw a black bear cub that was running funny, or maybe someone's escaped pet. But he wasn't there. He didn't see how it moved, how unnaturally fast it was, how purposeful. I've lived in that house for over 20 years now. I've seen all kinds of wildlife, deer, coyotes, bears, mountain lions in the distance. I know what they look like, how they move. This wasn't any of those. Sometimes I still catch myself looking out that kitchen window, watching the field. The land has changed. More houses in the distance, more roads cutting through what used to be wilderness. But whenever I look at that drainage ditch, I remember, I don't know what we saw that summer day in 2002. I can't explain it. I've tried to be rational, to find a logical explanation. But I know what I saw, what we both saw. Something not quite human, not quite animal, racing across our field in broad daylight. It's been over 20 years, and I still find myself checking the field sometimes when I'm washing dishes, still wondering where it was going in such a hurry, still wondering what it was. And sometimes, especially when I'm alone in the house and the wind is blowing through the grass just right, I wonder if it's still out there somewhere, running through whatever wilderness remains. Story 12. I still don't know why I'm sharing this. Maybe writing it down will help me process what happened. It's been 10 years since that day in July of 2013, but I remember every detail like it was yesterday. I'd just bought these expensive Nikon Monarch binoculars, saved up for months to get them. They were my pride and joy, and I was eager to test them out somewhere with a good view. Living near North Bend, Washington means I'm surrounded by gorgeous scenery, and I knew exactly where to go. This ridge that overlooks a hollow with dense forest. It's about a 4-mile hike from the nearest access road, so it's usually deserted. It was a Thursday, and I'd taken the day off work specifically to go hiking and test my new gear. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, about 75 degrees, with just enough breeze to keep the mosquitoes away. I packed light, just water, some trail mix, my phone, and of course, my new binoculars. I remember feeling so peaceful when I reached the ridge around 11 in the morning. The view was spectacular. You could see for miles across the valley, with the mountains rising in the distance. I sat down on this flat rock that made a perfect natural seat and started scanning the area with my binoculars. At first, I was just enjoying watching birds and the occasional squirrel. The clarity of these binoculars was incredible. I could see details I'd never noticed before, like the individual feathers on a hawk circling overhead. I spent maybe an hour just taking in the scenery, completely relaxed. That's when I noticed something moving in the hollow below, maybe 500 yards away. It caught my eye because it was dark brown and large, moving near a fallen log. My first thought was bear, which isn't uncommon in these parts. I focused my binoculars on that spot, excited at the prospect of observing a bear in its natural habitat from a safe distance. What I saw wasn't a bear. Through the crystal clear lenses, I could see a massive creature sitting on the fallen log. It was covered in dark brown hair, almost like a shaggy coat. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I adjusted the focus, thinking maybe I was seeing some weird shadow or a person in a coat. But as the image sharpened, my stomach dropped. This thing was using a rock, gripped in what looked like a hand, and it was pounding rhythmically against the log. The movement was deliberate, almost like it was trying to break open the wood to get at insects inside. But it wasn't the action that froze me in place, it was the creature itself. Its back was enormous, easily 2.5 feet across, broader than any human I've ever seen. And the hands, God, the hands were so disturbingly human-like, but larger, with what looked like grayish skin on the palms. I could see it gripping this rock, using it as a tool with a precision that made my skin crawl. I don't know how long I sat there, completely motionless, just watching this thing. Time seemed to stop. I was afraid to move, afraid to make any noise, even though I was hundreds of yards away. Through the binoculars, I studied its head. It had this distinctive dome shape with a slight point at the crown, not rounded like a human head, but not flat-topped either. The whole time, it seemed completely unaware it was being watched. It just kept working at that log, methodically, with purpose. I remember thinking, this can't be real, this has to be someone in a suit. But the movements were too natural, too fluid. There was no awkwardness that would come from wearing a costume. And who would be out here, miles from anywhere, wearing a suit like that? Then it happened. Something changed. The creature suddenly stopped what it was doing. It went completely still, like it sensed something. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could hear it all the way down in that hollow. Then it stood up. I nearly dropped my binoculars. This thing was huge, at least 7 feet tall, maybe more. It stood upright, completely bipedal like a human, but with this massive, powerful build. It turned, and for the first time I could see its face. The face is what still haunts me. It had this heavy brow ridge that shadowed its eyes, but I could still see them, large, dark, and deeply set. Its nose was wide and flared, almost like a gorilla's, but different somehow, more human-like in its overall shape. The skin around its eyes and nose was bare, without the thick hair that covered the rest of its body, and it was a grayish-brown color. The creature turned its head upward, looking directly toward the ridge where I was sitting. I don't think it could see me specifically. I was partially hidden by some brush and the distance was considerable, but it knew something was there. It started this weird rocking motion with its head, moving side to side, like it was trying to get a better sense of what it was detecting. I was completely frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking so badly that the binocular image kept blurring, but I couldn't lower them. I was both terrified and mesmerized. Then, without warning, it turned and crashed through the underbrush with incredible speed. The sound of breaking branches and rustling leaves carried all the way up to where I sat. It moved with this powerful, fluid motion that didn't seem possible for something so large. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the denser part of the forest. The spell broke, and suddenly I was scrambling to my feet, shoving my binoculars into their case with trembling hands. I didn't even bother securing the case properly. I just needed to get out of there. I practically ran back down the trail, constantly looking over my shoulder, convinced that at any moment that thing would emerge from the trees. My mind was racing the whole time. What the hell had I just seen? It couldn't be a bear. Bears don't sit on logs and use rocks as tools. It wasn't a person in a suit. The proportions were all wrong, and the movements too natural. The only thing my brain could label it as was Sasquatch or Bigfoot. But I'd never believed those stories. I'd always thought they were myths, campfire tales, or misidentifications of bears. I made it back to my car in record time, my lungs burning and legs aching from moving so fast down the trail. I sat in my car for a long time, trying to process what I'd seen. I remember checking my binoculars obsessively, as if they might contain some evidence of what I'd witnessed. When I got home, I immediately went online and started researching Sasquatch sightings in the North Bend area. There were more than I expected, and some descriptions matched details of what I'd seen with eerie accuracy. The dome-shaped head, the use of tools, the way it moved. I'd never paid attention to these accounts before, always dismissing them as the products of overactive imaginations or deliberate hoaxes. I thought about reporting what I'd seen, but who would believe me? I had no proof, no photos. I'd been so transfixed I never even thought to use my phone camera. Plus, I didn't want to become that crazy Bigfoot guy. I value my reputation and didn't want to risk it, so I kept quiet. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. I kept seeing that face in my dreams, those deep-set eyes looking up toward me, that head rocking side to side. I haven't been back to that ridge since. I've barely used those expensive binoculars, which now remind me of something I wish I could forget. I've told exactly 2 people about this before now, my brother and my closest friend. My brother was skeptical, but didn't outright dismiss me. My friend thought I was pulling his leg until he saw how serious I was. Neither of them has repeated the story, as far as I know. Sometimes I try to convince myself that I misinterpreted what I saw. Maybe it was just a bear, and my mind played tricks on me, or maybe it was some elaborate prank. But then I remember the precise way it held that rock, the deliberate pounding against the log, the intelligent look in those eyes, and I know what I saw was real. The thing that disturbs me most wasn't its size or appearance. It was the intelligence I saw. This wasn't just some animal. There was purpose in its movements, awareness in its reaction. It was using a tool. It sensed it was being watched. It made a decision to leave. I've become much more aware of my surroundings when I'm in the woods now. Every strange sound makes me freeze. Every shadow between the trees catches my attention. I still hike, but never alone, and never in remote areas. I stick to popular, well-traveled trails where there are always other people around. The forests around North Bend don't feel the same to me anymore. There's this constant awareness that something might be watching from just beyond the tree line. Something that most people don't believe exists, but that I know is out there. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, I wouldn't believe it if someone else told it to me. But I know what I saw that day on the ridge, and it's changed how I see the world. There are things in these forests that science hasn't documented, things that exist whether we acknowledge them or not. I still have those binoculars. Sometimes I take them out and look at them, wondering if I should return to that ridge, maybe try to see it again, maybe with a camera ready this time. But then I remember the way it looked up toward me, the way it seemed to sense my presence despite the distance, and I put the binoculars away. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen, and some mysteries, maybe, are better left unexplored. Story 13. I've never been the type to believe in cryptids or monsters. My wife Jennifer and I have always been practical people. I'm an electrical engineer, she's a pediatric nurse. We deal in facts, things we can see and prove. I'm still trying to explain what happened to us that night driving back from Charleston, but I can't. It's been 3 months, and I still get chills thinking about those eyes. It was a Thursday in late October. We'd driven to Charleston for Jennifer's cousin's birthday dinner. The party ran later than expected, and by the time we said our goodbyes, it was already past midnight. We were exhausted, but decided to push through and drive the 2 hours back to our home in Colombia rather than get a hotel. The drive started normally enough. Jennifer fell asleep in the passenger seat about 30 minutes in, and I had the radio playing softly. Some late-night talk show discussing football predictions. The roads were practically empty, just the occasional semi-truck or night shift worker passing by. Around 1:30 in the morning, we were on that lonely stretch of highway east of Sumter, near Shaw Air Force Base. If you've driven through there, you know how dark it gets. No streetlights, just miles of pine trees and swampland on either side of the road. The moon was nearly full that night, but the tree canopy was so thick in places that it barely helped. I remember checking the temperature display, 54 degrees, and thinking about turning the heat up a bit when I first noticed movement ahead. My headlights caught something about 25 yards up the road, emerging from the tree line on the right. At first, my brain tried to categorize it as a deer. We get plenty of those in South Carolina, and hitting one could total your car. But within a split second, I knew this wasn't a deer. The way it moved was all wrong. This thing walked upright. It stepped out onto the asphalt and stopped right in the middle of my lane. I immediately eased off the gas, not slamming the brakes, but gradually slowing down. The creature just stood there, completely still, directly in my headlights. I remember thinking, that's a kid. Some kid is out here in the middle of nowhere at 1:30 in the morning. It was about the size of an 11 or 12-year-old boy, maybe 5 feet tall. But as the car got closer and the headlights illuminated it better, I realized no human child looks like that. It was covered in hair, not fur, but hair. Long, smooth, dark brown hair that seemed to shine a bit under my headlights. The hair was thickest on its arms, legs, and around its face. The proportions were surprisingly human-like. 2 arms, 2 legs, a head set on narrow shoulders. But the whole thing was wrong somehow. When we were about 15 yards away, it turned its head toward us. That's when I saw its face, or what I could make out of it beneath the hair. Its eyes caught the headlights and reflected back. Not like a deer's eyes that glow bright yellow, but with a deep, cognizant reflection. Those eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was awareness there. Intelligence. Eric, what is that? Jennifer had woken up and was now leaning forward in her seat, knuckles white as she gripped the dashboard. I couldn't answer her. My mouth had gone completely dry. The creature and I locked eyes for what felt like minutes, but was probably only 2 or 3 seconds. It wasn't aggressive or scared. It was curious, assessing. I felt like it was categorizing us the same way I was trying to categorize it. Then, without warning, it moved, but not in panic or fear, like a startled animal. The movement was fluid, almost graceful. It pivoted and leapt toward the left side of the road in one smooth motion. I've seen Olympic athletes and professional dancers. This thing moved with more natural fluidity than any human I've ever witnessed. It cleared the ditch in one bound and disappeared into the vegetation of the swamp. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. No sound, no rustling branches, nothing. Just gone. I brought the car to a complete stop where it had been standing. Jennifer was fully awake now, her breathing rapid. "Did you see that?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to form words. The highway was completely silent, except for the hum of our engine and the sound of cicadas in the distance. We were stopped right next to a small bridge with a green sign that had Black River Swamp written on it. "What was it, Eric?" Jennifer's voice was shaking. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It looked like a little..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "Like a small Bigfoot," I finally said, the words sounding ridiculous even as they left my mouth. We sat there for maybe 30 seconds, both of us staring out into the darkness where it had disappeared. Part of me wanted to get out and investigate, shine my flashlight into the trees, but a stronger, more primal part knew better. Whatever that thing was, it belonged to the night and the swamp, and I didn't. I put the car back in drive and continued on, gradually building back up to speed. Neither of us spoke for several miles. What could we say? We're both educated people. We don't believe in cryptids or monsters. But we saw something that shouldn't exist, something I still can't explain. The next morning, it all seemed like a dream. We were back in our normal lives, me heading to work at the engineering firm, Jennifer preparing for her hospital shift. But over coffee, she brought it up. "I couldn't sleep last night," she said. "I kept seeing those eyes." "I know," I replied. "I kept thinking about how it moved. No person moves like that. And the hair," she added. "It wasn't matted or dirty like you'd expect from a wild animal. It looked, I don't know, almost groomed." We decided to research online during our lunch breaks. I found myself reading about Bigfoot sightings in South Carolina, something I would have laughed at just 24 hours earlier. There were more reports than I expected, especially around swampy areas. One account from 1988 described a smaller Bigfoot-like creature seen near Francis Marion National Forest, estimated to be about 5 feet tall. The witness described it as having silky hair, which sent shivers down my spine. That's exactly how I would describe what we saw. Not coarse fur like a bear, but silky hair that moved with the creature. Jennifer found reports of similar creatures being spotted near military installations across the country. Shaw Air Force Base was less than 10 miles from where we had our encounter. Some conspiracy theorists suggested these bases were placed strategically near habitats of unknown species for monitoring purposes. 24 hours earlier, I would have dismissed this as nonsense. Now I wasn't so sure. We considered reporting what we saw, but to whom? The local police would think we were drunk or hallucinating. Wildlife services would ask if we had evidence. We had nothing but our experience and the lingering image of those intelligent eyes staring back at us. It's been 3 months now, and we haven't told many people. My brother thinks we saw a deformed bear. Jennifer's friend suggested it was an escaped exotic pet like a chimpanzee, but neither explanation fits what we saw. I've driven back to that spot 3 times since then, always during daylight hours. The Black River Swamp is dense and impenetrable from the road. Without wading in with proper gear, there's no way to explore it properly. Part of me wants to organize a proper search, bring cameras and recording equipment. The rational part of me says to leave it alone. The encounter lasted less than 10 seconds from first sighting to when it disappeared into the swamp. 10 seconds that completely changed how I view the world. I've always believed we've catalogued most species on Earth, that science has explanations for almost everything. Now I'm not so sure. What haunts me most isn't the creature's appearance or even its impossible movement. It's the intelligence I saw in those eyes. That wasn't an animal reacting on instinct. That being knew exactly what it was looking at. It recognized our car as technology. It recognized us as humans, and it made a conscious decision to reveal itself briefly before disappearing. Sometimes I wonder if it was juvenile, as its size suggested. If so, are there adults nearby? Larger versions of what we saw, moving silently through the swamps of South Carolina while we go about our lives completely unaware. Jennifer and I still drive that road when we visit her family in Charleston. We always slow down near that small bridge, always scan the tree line. We haven't seen anything since, but the air feels different there now, charged with possibility and the unknown. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. 3 months ago, I wouldn't have believed it myself. All I know is what we saw was real. It existed in our world for those brief seconds, then slipped back into whatever hidden realm it inhabits. Those eyes knew we were seeing it, and sometimes I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, watching and waiting, far more aware of us than we are of it. Story 14. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. I'm not the type to make up stories or exaggerate. And honestly, I was hesitant to talk about it at all because I know how it sounds. But it's been over 3 years now, and I still can't explain what happened that morning in the woods. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. Back in November of 2019, I took my son, Ethan, he was 14 at the time, deer hunting on our usual spot near Cheraw, South Carolina. We've owned this 20-acre plot for about 8 years now. It's mostly pine forest, with some hardwoods and a couple small creeks running through it. Nothing special, just peaceful. I've hunted these woods for years and never felt uncomfortable until that day. We got there around 4:30 in the morning. It was cold, low 30s with a light fog hanging over everything, just your typical November morning in South Carolina. Ethan was still half asleep as we walked through the dark to our deer blind. It's nothing fancy, just a small wooden structure about 4 feet by 6 feet that sits on stilts, maybe 5 feet off the ground. There's a bench inside and small windows on all 4 sides for shooting. We've taken plenty of deer from that spot over the years. We settled in quietly, set our rifles against the wall, and I gave Ethan a blanket since it was so cold. I remember checking the time. It was about 4:50, still over an hour before sunrise. I told Ethan to get some rest while I kept watch, and he nodded off almost immediately. I must have dozed off too, because the next thing I remember is feeling Ethan's hand on my shoulder, shaking me. When I opened my eyes, he was leaning in close, his face pale in the darkness. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Something's moving outside." I sat up straight, suddenly alert. My first thought was deer, obviously, so I reached for my rifle. But Ethan's hand gripped my arm hard, stopping me. "No, listen," he breathed. I froze and listened. At first, I heard nothing except the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then I caught it, a soft crunching of fallen leaves, like something was carefully picking its way through the underbrush. It was moving slowly, deliberately, around our blind. This wasn't unusual in itself. Deer often move carefully through the woods, but something felt off about the way it was moving, too measured, almost like it was trying to be quiet. And whatever it was, it sounded heavy. I was about to whisper something to Ethan when it happened. A roar erupted from directly beneath our blind. Not a growl, not a scream, but a deep, guttural roar that seemed to vibrate through the wooden floor and into my chest. It was unlike anything I've ever heard, deeper than a bear, louder than a bobcat, and with a quality that was almost human, but not quite. The sound was so powerful, it felt like it was inside my head. Before I could process what I'd heard, the entire blind began to shake violently. Something huge was stomping on the ground right next to the support posts. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact sent shockwaves through the structure. Our rifles clattered against the wall. Ethan's thermos fell and rolled across the floor. The blind rocked on its frame like it might collapse. Whatever was doing this had to be massive. Each impact felt like someone dropping a refrigerator next to our stand. I could feel the vibrations in my teeth. I grabbed Ethan and pulled him close, both of us frozen in terror. I could feel his heart pounding through his jacket. He was shaking, and honestly, so was I. My mind raced through all the animals I knew in these woods. Bears, wildcats, but nothing made sense. Nothing could make that sound or shake the ground like that. The stomping lasted maybe 10 seconds, though it felt much longer. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. We sat motionless, barely breathing, straining to hear what would happen next. Then we heard it moving away, heavy footsteps crushing branches and leaves, small saplings snapping like twigs. Whatever it was big, and it was moving fast now, away from us. The sound gradually faded into the distance. I don't know how long we sat there, paralyzed. It could have been 5 minutes or 20. Finally, I found my voice. "We're leaving," I whispered, my mouth so dry I could barely speak. Ethan nodded, his eyes wide. I grabbed his arm and our rifles, not bothering with anything else. We climbed down the ladder as quietly as possible, both of us scanning the woods frantically. The forest was dead silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. Just eerie stillness. We didn't speak a single word until we reached the truck nearly half a mile away. My hands were shaking so badly, I fumbled with the keys. Once inside with the doors locked, Ethan finally broke the silence. "Dad, what was that?" His voice cracked. "I don't know, son," I said honestly. "I've never heard anything like it." We drove home in silence. Later that day, we tried to rationalize it. Maybe a bear had gotten under the blind, or perhaps some kind of freak wind gust had shaken the structure. But deep down, we both knew those explanations didn't fit what we'd experienced. The roar alone defied explanation. It wasn't anything I recognized from 20+ years of hunting these woods. We avoided that blind completely for almost a year after that. I couldn't bring myself to go back, and Ethan refused outright. When we did hunt, we stuck to the opposite side of our property, and I noticed Ethan constantly looking over his shoulder. I was doing the same thing. Then, last October, I finally convinced myself and Ethan that we should check the old blind again. It had been almost a year, and part of me needed to know if there was any evidence of what had happened. But this time, we brought Ranger, our black lab, figuring he'd give us some warning if anything was around. We went during daylight, around 4 in the afternoon. The blind was still intact, though it had weathered a bit. I checked the ground around the supports, but found nothing unusual. No tracks, no fur, nothing. Just normal forest floor. As we were heading back, I decided to take a shortcut through an old fence line where the brush grows thick. Ranger was leading the way, with Ethan behind him and me bringing up the rear. We were about halfway through when Ranger suddenly stopped and let out a low growl. Then I heard it, a rough, loud spitting sound coming from deep in the woods ahead of us. It's hard to describe, like someone clearing their throat, but much louder and more aggressive. Ranger's ears pinned back and he backed up against Ethan's legs. "Let's go," I said, turning around, "back the way we came." We started walking quickly, not quite running, back toward the truck. That's when I noticed the footsteps behind us in the brush. Heavy steps, matching our pace exactly. When we stopped to listen, they stopped too. When we moved, they moved. They weren't echoes. They were slightly delayed, deliberate, like something was following us just out of sight. Ranger stayed glued to Ethan's side, which was unusual for him. He's normally an adventurous dog who runs ahead, but that day he wouldn't leave us. His tail was tucked, and he kept looking back into the brush. We made it back to the truck without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched the entire way. The footsteps had followed us for at least a quarter mile before fading away. Since then, I've gone back to explore the property alone several times. I know it sounds crazy after what happened, but I needed answers. What I found didn't help explain things. It just deepened the mystery. In various spots around our property, especially near that old blind, I discovered trees that had been snapped clean off, about 6 or 7 feet up from the ground. Not cut, not broken by wind, but snapped with the wood splintered like something had pushed against them with tremendous force. Some nights, especially when it's quiet and still, my wife and I will be sitting on our back porch and hear faint knocking sounds echoing through the timber behind our house. 3 knocks, always in the same pattern, always from different directions. Sometimes there's an answering knock from farther away. I've researched everything I could about local wildlife. I've talked to other hunters in the area, though I've been careful not to share too many details of what happened. A few have mentioned unusual experiences, strange sounds at night, feeling watched, finding unexplainable tracks, but nothing as direct as what we experienced. I'm not saying it was Bigfoot. I'm not saying that. But I've been hunting these woods my entire life, and I know what bears sound like, what deer sound like, what every animal in these parts sounds and moves like. Whatever shook our blind that morning and followed us through the brush later wasn't anything I can explain. Ethan won't go near that blind anymore, and honestly, I don't blame him. We still hunt other parts of the property, but always together now, always with Ranger, and always with one eye on the tree line. I've installed trail cameras in several locations, including near the blind, but they either capture nothing unusual or, more frustratingly, stop working altogether for no apparent reason. I don't know what to make of all this. I'm not a superstitious person, and I've always been skeptical of Bigfoot stories. But after what happened that morning in November, I find myself questioning everything I thought I knew about these woods I've walked my whole life. Whatever was there that morning was within 3 feet of us, close enough that if the blind wasn't raised off the ground, I could have reached out and touched it through the wall. And whatever it was powerful enough to make a sturdy hunting blind shake like it was made of cardboard. I still can't explain it, and I'm not sure I want to know what it was. But I know what I heard, what I felt, and what I saw afterward. And sometimes, when I'm out in those woods alone, I still get that feeling of being watched, of something just beyond the next line of trees, waiting. Story 15. I've been lurking on this sub for years, but never thought I'd have my own experience to share. This happened in late summer of 2016, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've tried explaining it away 100 times, but nothing makes sense. Maybe someone here has had a similar encounter. My parents live on this massive 350-acre property outside of Center, Texas. It's super rural. The closest neighbor is about half a mile down the road. I was visiting with my 4-year-old son, Logan, just hanging out on the front porch that afternoon while my mom was taking a nap inside. Dad was still at work, so it was just us and their dog, Buddy, a black lab mix who's usually pretty chill. It was around 4 in the afternoon, one of those late summer days where everything feels kind of lazy and still. Logan was playing with some toy trucks on the porch while I scrolled through my phone. Buddy was sprawled out beside us, half asleep but occasionally lifting his head when birds flew by. I remember looking up from my phone just to check on Logan, and that's when I noticed something moving across the field toward the house. At first, I thought maybe it was one of my parents' neighbors walking over. They sometimes stop by unannounced, and from that distance, all I could tell was that it was a figure moving in our direction. But as I kept watching, something felt off. The way it moved wasn't quite right. I can't explain why, but every instinct in my body suddenly screamed that something was wrong. It was walking upright on 2 legs, but the movement was too fluid, too deliberate, and it was completely silent. Even from that distance, you should hear footsteps, twigs breaking, something. Without even thinking, I grabbed Logan's arm and said, "Hey buddy, let's go inside for a snack." I tried to keep my voice casual, but I must have sounded tense because he looked up at me with this confused expression. I practically dragged him inside, my heart already racing. I didn't want to scare him, but I also didn't want him outside with whatever that was approaching. Once we were inside, I locked the door and moved to peek through the gap where I'd left it slightly ajar. Buddy had gotten up and was standing at the edge of the porch, his posture completely rigid. That's when he started barking, but not his usual loud, excited bark. This was different, low, uncertain, almost like he was confused or scared. I'd never heard him make that sound before, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. The figure kept coming closer, walking so slowly and deliberately that it was almost unnatural. It moved with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. I kept waiting to hear footsteps, but there was nothing, just this eerie silence broken only by Buddy's strange barking. As it got closer, I could finally make out details, and that's when my blood ran cold. This wasn't a person. I mean, it walked like a person, upright on 2 legs with arms that swung naturally at its sides. But it was covered from head to toe in white hair, not dirty white or grayish, but clean, smooth, almost pristine white hair that seemed to shine a bit in the sunlight. I'm not exaggerating when I say I stopped breathing for a moment. This thing was between 4 and 6 feet tall. It's hard to be exact because I was so freaked out, but it wasn't huge like you'd expect a bear to be if it was standing up. Its build was almost human-like, but something about the proportions was just wrong. By now, it had reached our small decorative fence that separates the yard from the field, There were some wind chimes and little garden ornaments hanging there that my mom collects. The creature stopped and seemed to be examining them, tilting its head slightly like it was curious. It reached out with one hand, yes, a hand, not a paw, and gently touched one of the chimes, but somehow without making it ring. At this point, Logan was asking for his snack, and I was trying to quietly shush him while keeping my eyes glued to whatever was in our yard. I opened the door a bit wider to get a better look, and the hinges made this tiny squeak. That's when it turned and looked directly at me. I'll never forget those eyes as long as I live. They were dark, darker than human eyes should be, and larger, set in a face that was mostly obscured by the long white hair. I could only see part of its mouth, but the rest of its features were hidden. We made eye contact for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. It didn't seem aggressive or scared. It just looked at me like it was assessing me the same way I was assessing it. There was an intelligence there that made my skin crawl. Then, without any change in its demeanor, it turned away and continued walking, rounding the side of the garage and disappearing from view. I slammed the door shut and locked it, then ran to every window and door in the house, making sure they were all locked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the locks. Logan kept asking what was wrong, and I just told him there was a strange animal outside and we needed to stay inside to be safe. I debated whether to wake my mum, but after about 10 minutes of sitting in terror, wondering if that thing was going to try to get in the house, I couldn't take it anymore. I woke her up and tried to explain what I'd seen, probably sounding like a complete lunatic. To her credit, she didn't dismiss me outright. She asked Logan if he saw anything, and he said, yes, there was something outside that wasn't a dog or a bear. Kids are so matter-of-fact sometimes. Mom and I looked all around the house from the windows but didn't see anything. By the time my dad got home about an hour later, I was still shaking. We all went outside together to check for tracks or evidence, but the ground was too hard and dry from the summer heat to show footprints. I've spent the last 7 years trying to make sense of what I saw that day. I've researched every animal native to East Texas, thinking maybe it was just a bear with some kind of condition that made its fur white. But bears don't walk upright for that long, and they definitely don't have hands that can touch wind chimes without making them move. Plus, Buddy would have reacted much more aggressively to a bear. I've looked into all the Bigfoot lore too, but everything I read describes them as having dark brown or black hair, not white. And they're supposed to be massive, 7 to 9 feet tall, not the size this thing was. What freaks me out the most is how deliberate it all felt. This wasn't some animal that wandered into the yard by accident. It walked straight toward our house like it had a purpose. It examined things in our yard like it was curious about them. And when it looked at me, there was something behind those eyes, something that knew I was watching it. Sometimes I wonder if I should have grabbed my phone and taken a picture. But honestly, in that moment, all I could think about was protecting my son. The thought of pulling out my phone to document it never even crossed my mind until hours later. My dad installed security cameras around the property after this happened, but nothing like it has ever shown up again. My mom still lives there, and every time I visit, I find myself scanning the tree line, wondering if it's watching us. I wish I had been brave enough to keep watching, to see where it went or what it did next, but the fear of the unknown was too strong. I couldn't risk it coming any closer to my son. All I know is that on a perfectly normal summer day, in broad daylight, something covered in pristine white hair with dark eyes and completely silent movement walked through my parents' yard like it had every right to be there. I've never talked about this outside of my immediate family because I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw. It wasn't a person in a costume. It wasn't a known animal. It was something else entirely, and I still can't explain it. Has anyone else ever encountered something like this? Something white instead of the typical dark-haired creatures people describe. I need to know I'm not crazy, because this memory has haunted me for years, and I still get nervous any time I'm alone on my parents' property. Story 16. I still get chills thinking about what happened that night on Mount Lindesay Highway. My husband Matt, our 12-year-old son Ben and I were driving north toward Queensland after visiting my sister in New South Wales. This was about 3 years ago, but I remember every detail like it was yesterday. It was getting dark, around 7 in the evening, and that stretch of highway is pretty remote, all winding roads with thick bush on either side. We'd been driving for hours, and Ben had fallen asleep in the back seat. Matt and I were just chatting quietly about nothing important when we spotted headlights in our rear-view mirror. The road was really narrow there, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass each other comfortably. As the truck behind us got closer, Matt decided to pull over to let it pass since it was going much faster than us. We weren't in any rush, and that road can be dangerous if you don't know it well. So we pulled over onto this little gravel area at the side of the road. Matt flicked our headlights to low beam as the truck rumbled past, honking a quick thanks. I remember feeling the car shake a bit as it went by. One of those massive logging trucks that frequent that area. After it passed, we just sat there for a moment. I was checking the map on my phone to see how much longer until we'd reach our motel for the night. Matt took a sip from his water bottle, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was out there in the bush with no other cars around. When Matt went to pull back onto the road, he switched our high beams back on to get a better view of the winding road ahead. And that's when we saw them. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was like my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. About 20 feet in front of our car, illuminated perfectly in our headlights, this thing, this massive creature just stepped out from the left side of the road. It crossed the entire width of the highway in what seemed like just 2 strides. I've never seen anything move like that, so fast for something so big. It was enormous. I mean, seriously huge, like basketball player huge, but bigger and broader. I'd guess it stood about 8 feet tall, but hunched over a bit. The weirdest part was that it didn't seem to have a neck. Its head just kind of sat there, directly on its shoulders. And the hair, God, the hair. It covered its entire body, this matted orangey-brown color, like a dirty orangutan. But this was no orangutan. Its arms hung down past its knees, swinging as it moved. I think I gasped or made some kind of noise because Matt grabbed my arm. His grip was so tight it almost hurt, but I barely registered it because I was completely frozen, staring ahead. Then, before I could even process what I'd just seen, a second one appeared. This one was slightly smaller, maybe 7 feet tall, but with the same features, same orangutan-like hair, same long arms, same strange necklace appearance. It followed the exact same path as the first one, crossing the road just a couple seconds behind it. "Matt," I whispered, my voice shaking, "what the hell are we looking at?" He didn't answer right away. His knuckles had gone white on the steering wheel. Then a third one crossed. This one was smaller still, closer to my height, maybe 5.5 feet tall. A juvenile, I realized. A family. We were watching a family of whatever these things were. "They're Yowies," Matt finally said, his voice barely audible. "What the hell is a Yowie?" I asked. I'd grown up in Australia my entire life and had never heard that term before. Like Australian Bigfoot," he replied, still staring ahead at where they'd disappeared into the bush on the right side of the road. Ben stirred in the back seat, but didn't wake up. Thank God he didn't wake up. None of the creatures seemed afraid of us at all. They didn't run or scatter when our headlights hit them. They just continued on their way, like crossing highways in front of stunned humans was something they did every day. We sat there in silence for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. I kept expecting them to come back, maybe approach the car, but there was nothing, just the darkness of the bush and the occasional cricket chirp. Should we go?" I finally asked. Matt nodded slowly, but made no move to shift the car into drive. His eyes were still fixed on the spot where they'd disappeared. How much do you think that big one weighed? I asked, trying to make sense of what we'd seen by focusing on details. I don't know. 240, maybe 250 pounds, more than me, that's for sure, Matt said. He's about 90 kilos himself, so that thing had to be at least 110 kilos, probably more. And the little one? Maybe 55 kilos, about your size? We finally started moving again, but at a crawl. Both of us were scanning the bush on either side of the road, half expecting to see them again. I kept thinking about how they moved. Not like humans, not exactly like apes either. Something in between, but more fluid than either. Have you ever seen anything like that before? I asked Matt. He shook his head. No. But my grandfather used to talk about them. He worked as a ranger in the national park back in the 70s. Said he encountered one once, deep in the bush. No one believed him. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't just seen it with my own eyes, I admitted. We drove in silence for a while, both processing what we'd witnessed. The motel we'd booked was still about 40 minutes away, and every minute felt like an hour. Every shadow in the headlights made me jump, and every rustle in the bush beside the road had me imagining those creatures running alongside us. Do you think they're dangerous? I asked finally. I don't know, Matt replied honestly. They could have charged the car if they wanted to. They were big enough to cause some damage, but they didn't even seem to care that we were there. I kept replaying the sighting in my head, the way they moved one after another in a line. The largest one first, the male, I assumed, then the female, then the juvenile, like they were protecting the smallest one. It was so deliberate. Intelligent even. That's what unsettled me the most, I think. Not just that they existed when they shouldn't, but that they seemed to have a social structure, a family unit. It made them feel more real somehow, more substantive than just a fleeting shadow in the night. When we finally reached the motel, I was exhausted, but knew I wouldn't be able to sleep. We checked in, carried Ben to bed, he'd slept through the whole thing, and then sat outside our room on these plastic chairs, drinking the cheap instant coffee from the room and talking in hushed voices. We should report it, I said. Matt laughed, but there was no humor in it. To who? The police. Excuse me, officer. We'd like to report a family of Bigfoots crossing the highway. He had a point. Who would believe us? Maybe there's like a cryptid reporting website or something, I suggested. A what? Cryptid. It's what they call animals that might exist but haven't been proven. Like the Loch Ness Monster or Yowies, I guess. Matt looked at me with surprise. How do you know that? But you've never heard of Yowies? I shrugged. I watch a lot of documentaries when you're working nights. That night at the motel, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing those creatures whenever I closed my eyes. Their strange, necklace silhouettes, the matted hair, those impossibly long arms, and the way they moved, so fast, yet so deliberate. The next morning, I searched online for information about Yowies while Matt was showering. There were plenty of reported sightings in the area, going back decades. Some descriptions matched what we'd seen almost exactly. It was both comforting and terrifying to know we weren't the only ones who'd experienced this. We never told anyone about what we saw that night, not even Ben. What would be the point? Most people would think we were crazy or making it up. My sister would probably laugh and say we'd had too many road beers, though we hadn't been drinking at all. But sometimes, when we're driving on country roads at dusk, I catch Matt scanning the tree line, and I know he's looking for them too. I do the same thing. I can't help it. The thing that gets me is how bold they were. They weren't scared of us at all. They crossed right in front of our headlights, like they owned that road. And maybe they did. Maybe that part of the bush has been theirs a lot longer than it's been ours. I often wonder where they were going that night, what their lives are like out there in the wilderness. Do they have homes, communities? Do they watch us the way we study wildlife? It's been 3 years since that night on Mount Lindsay Highway, and I still don't have any answers. Just the memory of those three massive figures crossing the road, their orange-brown hair gleaming in our headlights, and the knowledge that there are things in this world that most people will never see, things that exist whether we believe in them or not. Sometimes I think about driving that route again, pulling over at that same spot, waiting to see if they cross again. But then I remember the way my heart pounded in my chest, the cold sweat on my palms, the sheer otherworldliness of what we witnessed, and I decide that once was enough. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen, and some mysteries are better left unexplored. Story 17. I've been debating whether to share this for years. It happened back in October of 1988 when I was 13, and it still messes with my head to this day. I've only told a couple people, and they either think I'm making it up or try to explain it away, but I know what I saw and what happened to me out there. We lived about 20 miles west of Anchorage in a small house my stepdad had built. He was big into hunting, fishing, typical Alaskan stuff, and had this old Honda four-wheeler he'd let me use sometimes. That fall, my mom had married him just a few months before, so I was still getting used to having a new stepdad and a new 9-year-old stepbrother named Kevin. It was early October, probably around the 5th or 6th. The leaves were changing, and there was that crisp smell in the air. You know that feeling right before winter hits in Alaska? That small window where everything's golden and red, but you can feel the cold coming. That's when this happened. That Saturday morning, my stepdad said I could take the ATV out if I brought Kevin along. He was always trying to get us to bond or whatever. Kevin was a quiet kid, always had his nose in a book or was playing with those little toy soldiers. Not really into outdoor stuff, but my stepdad was determined to toughen him up. So we headed out around 1 in the afternoon. I remember because I'd wanted to watch this show that came on at noon, and my mum made me wait until it was over before we left. The trails behind our property connected to this huge network that ran through state land. I'd been on most of them, but there were a few I hadn't fully explored yet. Kevin sat behind me, gripping my jacket. He hated the bumps and always closed his eyes on the sharp turns. I remember he was wearing this puffy blue coat that was way too big for him, and this red hat my mom made him wear because she was afraid he'd catch cold. We'd been riding for maybe an hour, pushing further out than I normally went. The trails were getting narrower, with these tall pines and thick brush on either side. In some spots, the overgrowth was so dense it made a kind of tunnel over the trail. The sun was still high, but in those sections it felt like dusk. I came to this part where the trail dipped down into a narrow valley. It wasn't very deep, maybe 30 feet from the top of the ridge to the bottom, but it was steep on both sides. The brush was crazy thick, alders, scrubby pines, and these tall grasses that were already starting to turn yellow. The trail twisted sharply at the bottom before climbing back up. As I approached that turn, I slowed down a bit. Not much, but enough to make the turn without tipping over. Kevin had his face pressed against my back as usual. I remember thinking how quiet it was. Usually you'd hear birds or the wind, but it was dead silent. That's when it happened. Just as I was making the turn, something ran across the trail about 15 feet in front of us. It was so quick I almost couldn't process what I was seeing, but it was huge, massive. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered in dark brown hair, almost black in some places. It wasn't a bear. I'd seen plenty of bears. This thing was running upright on 2 legs, but not like a person runs. It had this massive upper body, way bigger than any person I've ever seen, with long arms that swung as it moved. It crossed the entire width of the trail in 2 strides. 2. The trail was maybe 10 feet wide there. I didn't even think. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. I cranked the throttle and shot through that turn so fast the back end fishtailed. Kevin yelled and grabbed me tighter, but he didn't see anything. He told me later his eyes were closed for the turn. I didn't slow down until we were at least a mile away. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I finally stopped, Kevin asked why I was driving so crazy. I couldn't tell him. I couldn't even process it myself. I just said I thought I saw a bear and wanted to get away fast. The problem was, we were now on a loop trail that eventually circled back to that same valley. We could either go back the way we came, which meant going through that spot again, or continue forward for another hour to get home. We were already getting low on gas, and it would be getting dark in a couple hours. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Part of me was saying it was a bear standing up, or maybe a moose that just looked weird in the shadows. But I knew that wasn't true. What I saw was walking on two legs with a stride no human could match. Eventually, I decided to continue forward. I convinced myself that whatever it was probably long gone. Animals don't hang around trails, especially after ATVs come through, right? As we approached the valley again, I slowed down. Kevin asked why we were going so slow, and I made up some excuse about being careful on the downhill. The truth was, I was terrified. But I was also curious. What if I actually saw it again? But clearly this time, no one would believe me without proof. When we got to the spot where I'd seen it cross, I stopped completely. I idled there, looking into the woods on both sides. The brush was so thick you couldn't see more than 10 feet in. Kevin was getting impatient, asking why we were stopping. That's when I heard it. From the left side of the trail, maybe 20 yards into the brush, came the sound of branches cracking, not like a squirrel or small animal moving through. These were big branches breaking. Whatever was moving through there was heavy. Then I heard this grunt. Deep, powerful, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bear grunt or a moose call, it was something else entirely. Kevin heard it too and asked, "What was that?" Before I could answer, something hit the ground about 10 feet from us. It was a branch, thick, maybe 3 inches in diameter and about 4 feet long. It hadn't fallen naturally, it had been thrown. Another stick landed closer, then another. They were coming from the left side of the trail, from the exact direction of the sounds. I was frozen, my hand still on the throttle but unable to move. Then came the growl. To this day, I've never heard anything like it. Low, rumbling, but with this almost human quality to it. Not like a bear's growl, which I'd heard plenty of times before. This was different, deeper, more controlled somehow. It raised the hair on my arms and the back of my neck. Kevin started crying, and that snapped me out of it. I gunned the engine and we shot forward, climbing up and out of that valley as fast as the ATV would take us. I didn't slow down until we were within sight of our house. When we got home, Kevin was still crying. He told my mom and stepdad that we heard a scary animal in the woods. They asked me what it was, and I just said probably a bear, but I didn't actually see anything. I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I'd seen earlier or about the thrown branches. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I'd seen and heard. The way it moved wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. And the thrown branches, that was deliberate. That thing was trying to scare us off. It was intelligent enough to throw things to intimidate us. The next day, I found myself looking at the tree line behind our house differently. The woods that had always been my playground now felt threatening. I kept thinking about how easily that thing had moved through brush that would have taken me minutes to push through. A couple days later, my curiosity got the better of me. I told my mom I was going to ride the trails again, but this time I went alone. I didn't go all the way back to that valley. I couldn't bring myself to do that, but I went to a ridge that overlooked it from about a quarter-mile away. I sat there for almost an hour, scanning the valley with the binoculars my stepdad had given me for my birthday. I didn't see anything unusual, but I noticed something I hadn't before. On both sides of the trail where I'd stopped, the brush was flattened in paths leading away from the trail, like something big had pushed through recently. I never went back to that specific trail again, at least not alone, and never close to dusk. Sometimes when my stepdad would take us hunting, we'd pass near there, and I'd get this feeling of being watched, I never told him why I always wanted to be home before dark. Over the years, I've tried to convince myself it was just a bear, maybe standing up momentarily before dropping to all fours. But bears don't throw branches. They don't make paths through brush like what I saw. And they don't make that sound, that growl that I still hear sometimes in my dreams. I've lived in Alaska most of my life. I've encountered moose, bears, wolves, all kinds of wildlife. What I saw that day wasn't any of those. I know what the locals would call it, but I've never been comfortable putting that label on it. It sounds too crazy. Kevin and I never really talked about it afterward. He was too young to understand what had happened, and by the time he was old enough, it seemed like ancient history. But I've never forgotten. The image of that thing crossing the trail is burned into my memory. The height, the dark hair, the impossible stride. Whatever it was sending us a message that day. It was letting us know we were in its territory, and it wanted us gone, and it worked. To this day, I get uncomfortable in dense woods where visibility is limited. I always feel like something might be watching me from just beyond what I can see. I don't know what's out there in the Alaskan wilderness, but I know what I saw, and I know that growl wasn't from any animal officially recognized by science. That sound came from something that doesn't want to be found, something that's managed to stay hidden despite all our technology and exploration. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, in that same valley, throwing branches at anyone who stays too long in its territory.